Good morning to our new member, A. Could I ask you to do a audio check, please?
Hi, everybody. Not sure if you mean me.
Good morning, Jad. Could I ask you to do an audio check, please?
Good morning, everybody.
I think we're having a little trouble hearing you.
I can hear Jad well.
Can you hear me clearly, or is it still not good?
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Maisha. Could I ask you to do an audio check, please?
Yep. Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Alrighty, I was just informed we have quorum, so we can start. Good morning, everybody. My name is Councillor Chris Moyes, and I'm the chair of the Two-Spirit, Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, and Queer Advisory Committee. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm pleased to welcome all of you to our 5th meeting of the term. The clerk has confirmed that we have quorum, so I will call meeting to order. And again, welcome to those that are in the room and online, and to our staff, of course. This meeting is being held as a hybrid meeting in committee room number 2 at City Hall, and also using the city's WebEx technology, with members and staff connecting by video conference or calling in. We ask for your patience with any delays and technical issues. Members of the public are welcome to attend this meeting in person or can watch the meeting streaming live on YouTube at youtube.toronto/Toronto City Council live. A few reminders. Members, please keep your mic muted unless you wish to question staff or speak. If members wish to ask questions of staff or to speak, please make sure your video is on and raise your hand or unmute your mic and indicate your intention to speak, and I will create a speakers list. When voting on an item or motion, I would ask members to turn on your video and raise your hand to indicate your vote. If there is a recorded vote, you will be asked to state if you are in favor or opposed. Members, I want to remind you that although we are participating remotely, we must still submit your motions in writing. The clerk's staff are available at 2slgbtq@toronto.ca to help with motions. Although some of us are in different locations and meeting remotely today, the 2SLGQ Plus Advisory Committee acknowledges the land we are meeting on is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And I want to welcome, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but please correct me, Apsequin to the committee. Are you here today?
Yes, he's online.
He's online? You want to say hello? And please correct me if I pronounce your name.
It's Aptis Egan, and pronunciation was close enough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will now call for declaration of interest. Are there any declarations of interest on the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you would like to declare an interest, please raise your hand and unmute your mic to let me know and indicate the item number and the nature of the interest. Seeing none in the room or online, we'll continue. May I have a motion to confirm the minutes of the 2S LGBTQ plus advisory committee meeting on September 23rd, 2024? Cooper's in the room with me. Yeah. You want to move that? All those in favor, raise your hand. Opposed, carried. Thank you. There is new items of business to add to the agenda. Is there new items to be added?
Yes, new business item.
Okay. There's a new item of business to add to the agenda. It is a letter to appoint a new member to the committee. I'll move to add this to the agenda. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. This will now be item QS 5.5.
Can you just hear this right now?
Okay, I'm going to move to for receipt of this item. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay. So the first item is QS 5.1, meeting processes and the simplified rules of procedures. We have in front of us Carly Turpin. Is that you? Manager of local boards, tribunals, and council advisory bodies from the clerk's office. Will give a presentation on meeting processes and simplified rules of procedures. There we go.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. As Councillor Moyes mentioned, my name is Carly. I'm one of the managers with the City Clerk's office, and I'm just here to provide a brief overview of the rules of procedure and the processes involved in being on a council advisory body. This committee is, as we said, a council advisory body, and it operates in accordance with the City Council's simplified rules of procedure. Simplified just means that the rules are a pared-down version of City Council's procedures based on the same principles, but tailored to meet the needs of an advisory committee. The principles that form the basis of the simplified rules are on the screen in front of you, as well as in the presentation that was provided. It is expected that members of an advisory committee come to the table with different viewpoints, and these principles safeguard the rights of all members to participate equally in the meeting. A couple of those principles include the majority of the members have the right to decide, but the minority of members also have the right to be heard. Another principle, very important to our council advisory body meetings, is that all meetings must be open to the public. So this principle is actually enshrined in law, and all decision-making must take place in public. The public may also attend meetings in person or virtually. As you see on the screen, members may attend using WebEx as well, or come to the meeting room here at City Hall. The agenda serves as notice of the meeting. Only items included on the agenda may be discussed at the meeting, and notice for those items are included when we publish the agenda. All meetings must begin and end in public, but that doesn't mean that there are some very limited circumstances where information may happen in what's called a closed session. At a council advisory body, that is fairly unique. It doesn't happen very often, but there certainly are reasons why we could have a meeting that would take place in closed session. A couple of examples include personal matters about an identifiable individual, including a city employee or a local board employee, or litigation or potential litigation affecting the city. If we could just skip sort of the role of the chair slide. Perfect, thank you. The simplified rules set out the role of the chair and the vice chair. Essentially, the chair, or in the chair's absence, the vice chair, assures that the progression of business by ensuring that agenda items are fully considered, decided upon, and the order and decorum is maintained throughout the duration of the meeting. Next slide, please. Simplified rules also set out the responsibility of members during a meeting. They are listed here on the screen. If you recall, one of the foundational principles that underpin the rules is that all members have equal rights, privileges, and obligations. This sets out obligations as members of the committee. A couple of those responsibilities include voting on motions that are put to a vote, speaking respectfully, listening attentively, and not interrupting the proceedings. Speak only on matters or motions that are under discussion, and obey the chair's rulings and council's decisions. Next slide, please. Thank you. A meeting agenda, as I'm sure you are now very familiar with, our meeting agendas are posted online a week before the meeting. They are available to members as well as the public on the same day. The agenda lists the items of business, the order that they will be considered, and also serves as public notice of the committee's business. The committee secretary will prepare and publish and distribute the agenda for each meeting. They are published online on the city's TMMIS website, and if you haven't found that yet, please let any of the city clerk's office staff know, and we can certainly show you how to navigate all of the web postings for this meeting and all of council's other decision-making bodies. The agenda contains all of the information required for the meeting. You will see presentations linked if there's presentations, staff reports for consideration if there's staff reports, as well as communications from the public. Next, thank you. The simplified rules establish how an item can be added to the agenda. You, as committee members, may add items to the agenda. If you have an idea for an item, please reach out to program staff or to the city clerk's office. We can help you finalize the item with respect to content and form and make sure it fits within the scope of the committee's mandate. We can also provide you with the agenda closing deadlines as well, so any questions about how to submit an item or what you can do with an agenda item, again, please reach out to the city clerk's office or to the program leads on this advisory body. Each item has a unique identifier that is a combination of the committee code and meeting number and agenda item. Again, all of this can be seen online, and if you have any trouble navigating that, please reach out to us and we can certainly help with that. Order of business at a meeting. There's an order of business that you will see on every agenda, including the one before you today. The chair will call the meeting to order once quorum is present. The chair will then call for the confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. The committee will then move through the agenda, considering one item at a time. Once the agenda is complete, the chair will adjourn the meeting and there's no motion required. There is on occasion times where you will see we may reorder an agenda item, and that is just done with the consent of the committee, and the chair can put that forward. That's sometimes done if an agenda item has a number of public speakers and we'd like to hear from that first. We can certainly do that, or if there's some time constraints on staff that are here to present on items, we sometimes can reorder in that. That's usually left to the chair's discretion and will be done with the consent of the committee. So there is a process for discussing each agenda item, as I'm sure someone, if you've been on the committee for a while now, you've probably used to it, but for the benefit of those that might be new to the committee, I'll run through it very briefly. The chair will identify the item under consideration. If there's a staff presentation to be made on the item, staff will come to the area where I'm seated now and they will give a presentation on the item. If there are any public speakers registered, they will then be given the opportunity to have their 5 minutes to address the committee. Then members of the committee may ask questions of the public speaker, but then they may also ask questions of the city staff that were there presenting. Once we are done with questions of staff, members then take the matter into committee and may speak and move motions on the item. At the end of the item discussion, there will be a motion put forward and the committee members will be asked to vote on the item. So how do council advisory bodies give advice? Council advisory bodies can give advice by making recommendations to city officials on matters within their jurisdiction. They may also make recommendations to a council committee. So there are a few what we call standing committees. Again, they're all available online that outline the different committees and their mandates. And if you are interested, we can certainly walk you through and show you how to find all of the city's standing committees. But you may also make recommendations up to city council if it's a matter on the city council agenda. However, any recommendation that requires action by city officials or city council must first be considered by the appropriate standing committee. The reason why is, as a council advisory body, you cannot direct city staff, so you do have to send that recommendation up to standing committee to get the endorsement to ask staff to do something. And how decisions are made, these words you've probably heard thrown around quite a bit. I'll just go through them very briefly. To receive an item for information means you have heard what city staff have had to say, and you are just receiving the item. We're not taking any further action on the item. You will have a motion to adopt if there's a recommendation before you. So you'll see that typically in staff reports. If there's a staff report on your agenda, you will see a section called recommendations, and that is the item you would then vote on, and you would adopt the recommendation in the report. A motion to amend an item means there is a recommendation in front of you, but the committee would like to make changes to it or has some suggestions, in which case we would do what's called a motion to amend. A motion to defer would be an item is before you, but perhaps we've run out of time, which sometimes does happen, and there will be a vote to defer the item to the next meeting. So in that case, there would be a motion put forward with the next committee's meeting date, and the committee would be asked to vote to defer it, and the item would then come forward at your next meeting on the agenda in the same format it was before you today. And last but not least, there is a motion to refer an item. So if something is before you and the committee feels like before it makes a decision on it, you would like additional information, you can refer the item back to staff to do further work on it and then bring it back to the committee. Again, these are all things that the city clerk staff can help you with. If you ever have questions about motions, please reach out to the committee secretary or the committee administrator, and we will certainly walk you through it and provide you with your options and help you format that. Sorry, jumped ahead of myself there. Slide on motions. A decision is made by voting on a proposal contained in the motion. So again, clerk's office staff will help you draft a motion. We do ask that you let us know as far in advance as possible if you are working on a motion. When you do engage the clerk staff to work on a motion with you, it is confidential. We don't share that motion unless we have your permission. You may get a response back from us asking for your permission to share. If there is some technical information in your motion that we want to verify with city staff, we will ask your permission before reaching out to that specific city staff on that. Motions are typed out and displayed on the screen when it is time for voting on them. And the chair will rule motions which are not within the mandate of the committee as out of order. So again, please use your committee secretary or your committee administrator and just ask questions anytime. They can help you format your motion so that it is in a proper format that the committee can discuss and then vote on. Which leads into our next slide on voting. So a rule, again, in the simplified rules is all members present must vote. Unless, of course, you're prevented because you have a conflict, but again, that's something please reach out to the clerk's office staff on. A majority vote is required to pass a motion. If there is a tie vote, then the motion does fail. Members may vote by a show of hands, or you could ask for what's called a recorded vote, in which case everybody's names and their vote is recorded in the minutes. A couple of other just administrative meeting matters. You may have heard the word quorum tossed around this morning. We wanted to make sure we had quorum before we could start the meeting, and that just means that we have a majority of membership here before we could start a meeting. So it is very important to please, again, let us know if you are unable to make a meeting so we can make sure that we have quorum to start the meeting. And quorum, I believe, for this committee is 8. Along the same lines, absence, just please let us know in advance if you are unable to make a meeting. Minutes and how to follow decisions. Again, all of the minutes are prepared and published on the city's website. You can find past meeting minutes. You can find the previous term of this advisory body if you want to look back and see what else the committee has looked at. And if you have any trouble with having to navigate that, again, please reach out to your city clerk's contacts and we will help you navigate that. That concludes my very administrative presentation. If you have any questions now, I'm happy to answer, or if you would like to reach out afterwards, we will certainly be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Carly. Much appreciated. Any questions for Carly? Seeing none, I'll ask Mark to move this item. All those in favor, for seat. Opposed, carried. Thank you. Thank you. The next item is QS 5.2, the access plan for Two-Spirit, trans and non-binary youth. Denise Andrea Campbell, Exec Director, and Kara Kashner, Policy Development Officer from Social Development, Finance, and Administration, will give a presentation.
Good morning.
Good morning and welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Councillor Moyes and committee members. Thank you for this important opportunity to launch with you the new access plan for Two-Spirit, trans, and non-binary youth. My name is Denise Andrea Campbell, and I am the Executive Director of the City's Social Development Division. My pronouns are she and her. 10 years ago, I made a commitment and took some early steps to develop this work. I am deeply honored to be sitting beside Kara Kastner, the talented policy development officer who has worked tirelessly to deliver the access plan before you. Kara's pronouns are they and them. We're here to provide you with information on the city's first coordinated initiative to better the needs of gender diverse youth ages 12 to 29 in Toronto, known as the Action Plan for Two-Spirit, Trans, and Non-Binary Youth. I will give you a little background, and then it's my privilege to have Kira walk you through the process to develop the plan and the overview of the plan itself. So according to the 2021 census, 1 in every 300 Canadians over the age of 15 do not identify with the gender assigned to them at birth. Even amidst growing threats to their rights and freedoms internationally and here in Canada, data also shows that younger Canadians are 3 to 7 times more likely to identify as gender diverse than older generations. Beyond the growing legislative threats, Two-Spirit, trans, and non-binary youth experience harassment, discrimination, and violence at higher rates than cisgender youth. And they face consistently poorer health and social outcomes as a result. It will come as no surprise that gender diverse youth at the intersections of other forms of systemic discrimination, such as colonialism, racism, xenophobia, ableism, misogyny, and poverty, face even worse outcomes. Canadian municipalities play an important role in alleviating some of the health and social burdens of transphobia that impacts youth. The City of Toronto has a number of policies and programs already in place to increase gender inclusivity for both residents and staff. However, more can and should be done. The Access Plan for Two-Spirit, Trans, and Non-Binary Youth builds on the successful Toronto Youth Equity Strategy, which was adopted by City Council in 2014. The Toronto Youth Equity Strategy identified 28 priorities for the city to address key issues faced by youth aged 12 to 29 who are most vulnerable to involvement in violence and crime. City Council then supported staff to develop a second phase of the Toronto Youth Equity Strategy that addresses gender-based violence. Subsequently, in 2017, this direction was enhanced when staff were directed to focus that work specifically on the experience of transgender youth. In 2021, an early draft of the plan was brought forward to this very committee. And the committee provided feedback, including ways that we could enhance engagement with the broader community. So before I turn it over to Kira, I want to share a quick note on language. As you know, many terms are used by people who identify with genders that are not cisnormative. The city recognizes that the popularity and acceptability of these terms changes over time. In this work and in this presentation, two-spirit, trans and non-binary, and gender diverse are used to refer collectively to the diverse communities of youth that we hope will benefit from the Access Plan. This includes but is not limited to the many terms shared on the screen before you. I'll pass the presentation on now to Kira, who will speak to the content of the plan and share details on how this work was developed.
Thank you, Denise. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, committee members. So this access plan was designed based on extensive research and community consultations with Toronto's diverse two-spirit, trans, and non-binary youth and their advocates. It's intended to promote self-determination for two-spirit, trans, and non-binary youth, and therefore the priorities of the plan are tied very closely to what we heard in community consultations. Building on consultations that were conducted prior to 2021, Social Development, Finance, and Administration has spoken with even more young two-spirit, trans, and non-binary Torontonians and their advocates through additional rounds of community engagement more recently. In 2023 and 2024, an advisory table of 12 community service providers who also have lived experience was convened to provide insights into barriers to gender-affirming service provision. Indigenous gender diverse youth participated in 2 sharing circles that were led by an Indigenous facilitator and supported by an Anishinaabe. And most recently, 8 engagement sessions were held with even more gender diverse youth from across the city with a mix of lived experience to inform the implementation of the Access Plan. In addition to community engagements, Social Development, Finance, and Administration has renewed previous partnerships with divisions and agencies here at the city, and we've created new ones. We've incorporated findings from numerous public data sets and research initiatives that have emerged since 2021. And we've sought out examples of trans inclusion from other municipalities and met with 10 community partners and subject matter experts from academia and community to inform implementation. What results is a first-of-its-kind initiative that aims to improve health and social outcomes for two-spirit, trans, and non-binary youth between the ages of 12 to 29 by reducing barriers to City of Toronto programs and services. The Access Plan is comprised of 56 actions across 6 outcome areas. It's ambitiously comprehensive, but was designed with feasibility and sustainability as guiding principles. Not only is the plan comprised of actions that are achievable, it enhances commitments our partners have made to other equity initiatives at the city, including a section focused on advancing reconciliation. We've also designed a robust monitoring and evaluation strategy that will enable continuous improvement in this area of work. Our 15 division and agency partners are committed to achieving the outcomes set by the Access Plan within their existing resources before the end of 2027. The 56 actions in the plan fall into 6 areas: service and program access, housing stability and shelter access, employment and poverty reduction, mental health and well-being, data collection and accountability, and community safety. From the 56 actions in the plan, 14 have been identified as priorities. You can see the numbers of those actions on this slide. For more information and additional detail, I'll invite you to the public-facing report that was published as part of this agenda, specifically page 30. These priority actions reflect the most pressing concerns shared with us by Two-Spirit, trans, and non-binary youth and their advocates, as well as what the data tells us about where the greatest disparities are. In addition, some of these actions have been prioritized because they're foundational and serve as enablers to other components of the plan. Some of the changes that we're working towards with these priority actions include 20 policies, programs, or services enhanced to remove gendered access barriers for youth, staff training on gender-inclusive services and program provision, along with targets set for completion rates, new policies established to guide gender-inclusive washroom and change room facilities, a gender-inclusive update to the Toronto Shelter Standards, the prioritization of Two-Spirit, trans, non-binary, community-serving organizations for access to housing development opportunities, gender-inclusive and culturally appropriate enhancements to 10 youth workforce development and training programs, the creation of 10 new leadership opportunities for Two-Spirit, trans, and non-binary youth on advisories, boards, and other governing bodies here at the city, 10 new or enhanced sources of gender-based data on youth will be established, and 13 public safety initiatives will be enhanced for greater gender inclusivity. The full list of 56 actions that will be undertaken as part of the plan are, again, in the public-facing report that's been shared with you, beginning on page 44. Taken together, the 56 actions are where the City of Toronto can make the most positive impact at this time for gender-diverse youth. Over the next several years, social development, finance, and administration will be working very closely with our partners to support them as they work towards meeting their commitments in the Access Plan. We've established interdivisional working groups so that staff can more easily collaborate on key areas of work without reinventing the wheel. Social development, finance, and admin will continue to build organizational capacity through guidance to our partners on promising practices for gender inclusivity, and we'll take learnings from our monitoring and evaluation strategy and feed them back into programs and services for ongoing enhancements. In addition, staff are already looking ahead. The city's work to reduce the burden of transphobia on youth must evolve alongside shifting landscapes. In future, the city may have the opportunity to expand the Access Plan work internally by welcoming more division and agency partners. We've also heard loudly that a by Indigenous, for Indigenous Access Plan is desired. Lastly, we may also find opportunities in future to support capacity in oversubscribed services at the community level. This is the city's first dedicated plan focused on gender-diverse residents, and we recognize more work will be necessary to achieve our goal. This will set a foundation for organizational readiness to delve further into meeting the needs of gender-diverse populations with more depth and breadth. As these or other opportunities to advance this work arise in future, staff will very likely return to this committee for guidance, feedback, and collaboration. That concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for your time. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Denise, and thank you, Kira. Much appreciated. Great report. I'm sure we have many questions from committee members. Think Angel, I see your hands up first. Go ahead, you have 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I really appreciate the report, and I read through it, all 59 pages of it, and the 56 recommendations. Thank you very much for that committee in doing all this work. And I recognize also that this presentation was strictly for ages between 12 and 29. I know there is, with senior services, long-term care, community education regarding rainbow seniors, respective affirmative and inclusive care. My concern is, so the youth 29 and under 12 to 29 and seniors have agency within the City of Toronto, and the services that the city provides Can the committee comment on any programs that might be between the ages of 30 and say 60 or 65? Because I think that's the missing middle, as it were. But of course, as the committee noted, there's like lots more work to be done yet, and perhaps that'll be in the future. Thank you. So the question is, what programs or access programs are there, or access abilities are there for individuals in the 2S LGBTQI+ community to access these services from the City of Toronto, or any programs that they might have for this age group? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question, Pink Angel. This initiative, as you heard, followed in the footsteps of a youth equity strategy called the Toronto Youth Equity Strategy, which is where we got our age group from. Very early on in this initiative, we spoke to Senior Services Division to understand where their important work was headed and were there any opportunities for collaboration there. We know that, trans youth and trans adults face similar risks, and youth are, of course, more vulnerable because of their age and stage in life, but that doesn't mean that adults don't need supports as well. We feel strongly that because many of the actions in this plan will lead to gender-inclusive changes to infrastructure here at the city that is open and available to people of all ages, and that it will change supports that's available to people of all ages, that this will have positive effects for people of all ages in the trans community. But this plan is scoped to youth, and that's certainly my area of expertise. But I think this sets a very strong foundation for this work to evolve and continue to meet the needs of a much broader two-spirit trans non-binary population in the city.
Okay. Do you have a follow-up question, Pink Angel?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So what I am understanding is that currently there is no initiative for that age group that I spoke of. Will there be something in the future, perhaps?
Hello, Pink Angel. Thank you for the question. So I think to Kara's point, that this is a starting point for us as a city, and that this work is foundational and it will benefit many age groups within the trans community. I think one of the things that I can certainly say, this is my 20th year at the city, and a big part of the work that I've been proud to be a part of within social development has been creating equity-based strategies that move, educate, and really ground many parts of the city in understanding the needs of particular communities and growing from there. So what I would say to you at this point is this is a foundational starting point, and our aim as a city will be to not only do this work, but learn from this work and grow this work over time.
Thank you. Any further questions from anybody else? Terrence? And then Ranjit? Go ahead, Terrence, 5 minutes.
Awesome. Couple questions and then recommendation. So first question, hopefully you're taking notes. So looking at services, so question in regards to location of services. Often things are saturated in a particular neighborhood, downtown, Church Street. And so wondering if the plan includes also making sure that the services that you had mentioned, the outcome areas, will be looking at all of Toronto. So that's question one. Mentioned housing and shelter access as one of them. So I'm wondering if that means looking at integrating with, general youth housing and shelters, or creating separate systems? And coupled onto that, again, is geography being taken into account so it's not saturated all in one area? And then the last thing is, I noticed that there was mental health and well-being. I didn't see health. Wondering if healthcare is on the plan as well. And with that being said, being part of a CHC, Community Health Center, this is something internally a few allies and people within the different systems have been trying to look at and work at, creating capacity within CHCs to offer care, and maybe working with RHO or things like that. But I'm wondering if maybe there'll be work from the city's end with, say, the Ministry of Health and maybe Access Alliance, because I think community health centers would be a great point to really, I guess, kick off that access to health care. So noted mental health, not too sure if actually like primary care health is also integrated into that, but yeah. So thoughts or questions and an idea.
Thank you for the question, Terrence, and hello. So Action 17 specifically invites our partners to think about geography. Enhancing, improving access through greater geography, so that is absolutely integrated into the plan. In terms of housing and shelter, we are looking at ways to reduce barriers to the services that already exist. And so we're not creating a new system, so to speak, but looking at how this population can access services that should already be available to everybody. In terms of primary health care, as I'm sure you know, health care is more the domain of the province and to whatever degree the federal government. And so the authority of the City of Toronto to act on that is very scoped. We do have, harm reduction programs here at the city, for example, which are spoken to in this plan. So again, reducing barriers, improving access to those kinds of healthcare programs. But I've made note of your recommendations for other opportunities, and I thank you for those.
Okay, do you have a follow-up, Terrence? Okay, thank you. Ranjit, I saw your hands up.
Yes.
5 minutes.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this really, I would say, groundbreaking report. And I can imagine the amount of work that has gone into it, and it's really credible and it gives hope. Thank you for that. I have 3 comments, questions, and maybe recommendations too. So one is, now I identify myself as a settler, arrivant, settler, not an indigenous person, immigrant. So that is, so what I'm talking about, 2S, Two-Spirit or indigenous peoples, is from the little knowledge that I have gained so far. And I am an eternal learner, and I commit to justice for indigenous peoples, including Two-Spirit peoples and youth. So when we cluster 2S, Two-Spirit, within the acronym, sometimes it gives that clustering can invisibilize and group them together. From what I have learned about indigenous peoples and Two-Spirit peoples is that there are remarkable distinctions and differences. Just by being Two-Spirit and identifying somebody, self-identifying themselves as a Two-Spirit person means that they are identities bestowed upon them by their creator. So it's not just a mere identity, but a responsibility. So therefore, Two-Spirit people are working within their communities as knowledge keepers, warriors, and so on. Advisors, mediators, those are some of the roles they have been given by the community, by the creator. So now when we talk about Two-Spirit here in the urban context, there is a massive sense of displacement from their own communities. So those are the things, and because of the ongoing, of course, settler colonialism and dispossession of indigenous peoples and two-spirit people in that sense, and two-spirit youths in particular. So we need to identify these unique challenges two-spirit people and two-spirit youth are facing in this report and also in the action plan. That is my suggestion. And this is where you can reach out to Center for Two-Spirited Peoples and other indigenous organizations. That's one suggestion. And the other second one is about the age. Now, I have worked with LGBTQ plus refugees and newcomers at various agencies. So what happens is when there is a specific age, especially let's say age 29, and the next day after the birthday, they become ineligible for the services that they are being given. And also I have had clients who are just like 29 plus, and they are not eligible for the programs that are meant for youth, queer and trans youth. So my suggestion is, question is there any transitional plan? It's not just a segmented approach that we need to have. I suggest that we need to have some kind of a transitional period, 2 years, 5 years, depending on the person's where they are at, and make referrals and make connections to the adult services. That's the second suggestion and the question. Third one is about LGBTQ plus refugees and newcomers. My suggestion is to identify being new to Canada as a unique social determinant of health. It is so important, and when you talk about LGBTQ plus refugees and newcomers, and especially transgender non-binary young people, they don't have any access to healthcare, virtually none, until they receive the immigration ID and then get the health coverage. So until then, there is a crucial time period. It can be months. So within that period is when they are very new to Canada, no place to live, sometimes on the street and shelters, facing violence, and in dire need of immediate healthcare, access to healthcare. So what can we do to guide or make the referrals and support services for the newcomers? So by identifying LGBTQ plus newcomers to Canada, mostly Black and racialized people, so there are additional intersections of challenges that fall onto them.
Thank you. Allow staff to answer. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Over your time right now. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for your questions and so many important recommendations. I can speak to a few of those pieces, and I've made note about everything to take back. We recognize the unique experiences and role of Two-Spirit and Indigenous trans non-binary youth and people. And there are 15 actions in this plan which have been crafted specifically to meet their unique needs. So that's actions 1 to 15. With the goal of advancing reconciliation as an important priority for this plan. Part of that work was done in partnership with community organizations. You mentioned Two-Spirited People of the First Nations. We've previously worked with the Native Youth Sexual Health Network and so on. So that's been a very significant priority for this work. We also do have actions in this work which speak to the unique experiences of newcomers and highlight them as a priority social determinant, as you've mentioned. And again, I thank you for all of your other important recommendations.
Thank you. Any further questions? Absequin? Absegin?
Great, thank you. Just a few facts. So 2022 statistics, 50% of Indigenous peoples in Canada are under the age of, I believe, 29. So that means that half of the Indigenous people in Canada are youth, technically. And 61% of Indigenous peoples in Canada live in urban areas. So my question is specific to Indigenous youth and how health, mental health, and access to culture are integrated into this plan.
Thank you for the question. We have built there are several actions in this plan in which the recommendation to really consider opportunities to enhance programs and services so that they are safe, welcoming, and culturally appropriate for Two-Spirit and Indigenous trans non-binary youth are integrated into not only those first 15 actions, but also spread throughout the whole plan, which of course keeps Indigenous youth as a priority population throughout, not just the 15 actions. There is an imperative in this plan to increase access to community, to increase access to land, and to support cultural activity in the community, to support other community in supporting Indigenous folks in engaging in cultural activity in public. You know, we know that there have been challenges around sacred fires. For example, there's been ongoing discussion, so we've been thinking about pieces like that in this plan, and it is built right in.
Okay. Do you have a follow-up question, or you're good? Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Mika, go ahead. 5 minutes.
Hi. So I wanted to start by thanking you folks for doing so much research and spending all that time that I can imagine was spent. I did read through all of the actions as well. And my biggest question concerns, is there any action to increase youth awareness of programs and services using different methods that are currently used? So specifically actions 17, 18, 22, 28, and 31 focus a lot on outreach and increasing staff's ability to for referring youth to programs and services. But this often is youth who are already kind of like in the dire situations where they need these programs immediately. And if there is work being done to change outreach strategies so youth are able to access programs ahead of being, for example, homeless, can often really help youth's ability to continue to thrive rather than having to go through these cycles of, you know, being housed, fed, and then having to use city programming again before repeating it all.
Yeah, thank you for such a great question. You know, as you've mentioned, there's many actions that speak to the ways in which we might better connect with youth. And I think it's in part because we're thinking about ensuring that these programs are accessed in a moment where it might be more preventative. The ways that our partners on this plan might undertake achieving these actions is quite diverse. I can't speak to all of them at the moment. You know, we have a lot of partners and they run a lot of different kinds of programs, and many of them are in a really good position to intervene in a preventative phase. I'll stop there for now.
Just to add, we certainly welcome, it seems like you've got some thoughts there about how we can do the things a little bit differently to ensure that we're reaching the young people that this plan is intended. So we're certainly happy to put to you. If you've got some recommendations or ideas, happy to hear them, because I think that as we do this work, we want to make sure that our partners and ourselves are trying everything to be the most impactful, and outreach methods are changing constantly. So happy to hear any thoughts that you've got. We can certainly take that offline. Thank you.
Any further questions?
I think recommendations-wise, just quickly, I think being able to ask youth how they access information, so various focus groups, is often very helpful. It's hard to know where youth find information for programs and stuff without asking them directly. I have one more question. It's kind of quick. So my question is there any support offered to folks that are kind of aging out of the youth category? So a lot of gender diverse youth who rely on programs and services to survive while they're still considered youth, they're kind of lost and left on their own once they're no longer considered youth. And there's, as Pink Angel mentioned before, there's a drastic decrease in services that are available once you are in kind of like the middle category of adult.
Thank you for that question. So I think perhaps three of you have raised the issue of aging out or transitional programs and the need to go beyond 29. So we're hearing you. We are working on a council direction that stemmed from a particular focus on young people, and so that is the starting point. But as Kira noted in the presentation, that there is a lot of recommendations that cover a broad spectrum of this community that isn't just youth specific, and I think that that's important. One of the things that we will take back to the city divisions and agencies that are part of this plan is how we can be more mindful to look at that transitional period and beyond age 29 in the work that we do. As Kira noted at the beginning of this is really about the city doing things that are important, that are fundamental, and so that certainly needs to cover a broad section of Toronto's trans population. So we will continue to look for those opportunities. I think that as I noted before, plans start with really action-oriented commitments like the ones that are in this plan, and they grow as staff learn more, partner more with community leaders and agencies that are doing this work, and hear more from the public. So this is a starting point, and the work will continue to grow and deepen.
Okay, thank you. I think I saw Lauren's hand up, and then Jad, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a quick question. Thank you again for the presentation and the plan. But I was wondering if you could offer any more insight into the monitoring and evaluation of the plan. It was a bit vague, I guess I would say. So is there going to be any reporting back to this body, or just like, yeah, how can we track the progress basically being made?
Thank you for the question. So the monitoring and evaluation strategy is a really exciting opportunity for us to do two things, two very nerdy things. One, of course, is to track the performance, do performance measurement for the activities that will be undertaken as part of this work. So the commitments to achieve the actions in the plan. We will look at process indicators to see, are they doing what we thought they were going to do, and what are the outcomes and impacts of that work. And that will be over the many years of this plan. The other thing we're very excited to hopefully be able to do is fill a gap in the data to some degree about this population. So trans people in general, and certainly trans youth, are really under-researched at this time. And monitoring and evaluation strategy is, a big data collection undertaking. So we're hoping to leverage that to flesh out even more details that might be usable for, in addition to enhancing the work at the city, other work elsewhere. We've created a public-facing website. The address is on the very back page of the plan, toronto.ca/2STNBYouth, where we will be posting updates on the work of this plan as it comes forward.
Okay, do a follow-up?
Not a question, but I think that it would be nice to see, some report backs to this committee as things start to be measured over the next several years, I think. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jad, 5 minutes.
Thank you so much for all the great work that you're doing. I would just say kindly keep an eye on the intersectionality lens that's coming from an equity perspective. And through that, not just looking at the folks that we are serving, but also not just the folks that we are serving, but also how these programs and services are being implemented, and to make sure that the lens of being trans, being non-binary, being youth also intersects with the lens of being an immigrant, with being from being POC, being a racialized body, and all these other, and having disabilities. So these are all very important things to consider, especially knowing that many of the work that we do sometimes does not keep a proper eye of equity on these intersections. So just adding that point.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Just a reminder, there are questions and then there's speaking. So you'll have an opportunity to speak after questions are over. Any other further questions? Okay, Ranji, you spoke already, but I'll allow you 3 minutes to speak again. Go ahead.
Is it my time?
Yes.
Okay, quick question. I have a feeling that this plan should include or as a follow-up question, follow-up action about the parents, adults, and communities where 2S LGBTQIA+ youth are coming from. I can talk a little about the immigrant families, and sometimes there are these conflicts of cultures, and then parents do not know what to do. Parents are scared of being blamed for something wrong they have done to their youth, young people, their children, and then the young people are growing up in the dominant Canadian culture, and they have these cultural conflicts. So I think it is very important to include an educational piece as an organized outreach program for the parents and the communities, maybe as a follow-up, maybe as part of this plan. Just adding that thought. Thank you.
Thank you.
You want to respond or no?
I can respond very briefly. I think it's a hugely important point, and we certainly looked for opportunities to connect with parents and, the adults of the youth that we hope to support. One avenue is through Children's Services, which is the part of the city that works with children, not with people in this specific population. And by virtue of that, they're connecting with, parents and caregivers. So we've been in conversation with them about this very important issue. There are some other opportunities that we've spoken to about this with our partners. I will also say Children's Services is doing their own very important work in this area. But, I thank you for the point and the recommendation. It's an important one.
If I could also add, I forget which year, so, but as part of, on the education part, the public awareness part of your comments, we have a Toronto for, thank you, 2018, we have a Toronto for All program, which is a public education program that we launched many years ago, focused, the original campaign was focused on xenophobia. And we have since grown that program to support Torontonians to understand and learn about various intolerances within, experienced by different communities within Toronto, and to grow. And one of my absolute favorite campaigns was in 2018, focus on trans youth of color. And I think that we, the content is still live, and I think one of the opportunities before us is how do we use this launch to reanimate some of the Toronto for All content that's there. But again, I think as we move forward, what's exciting, one of you spoke about intersectionality and the division that we're a part of, and you'll see a number of our colleagues here on work plan pieces that you'll be describing in the next item. But the Toronto Newcomer Office, the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Office, the Youth Development Unit, Community Safety, Community Development, these are foundational parts of our division. So every time we move forward and advance an access plan such as the one in front of you, it gives the entire division of policymakers, grantors, community development staff, youth workers, an opportunity to better understand both the service barriers as well as the needs and assets of a particular community, and then infuse that in the work that we do and the perspective that we have. So I just want to underscore that point, because you'll hear me often talk about how this is a beginning and it grows and deepens. But part of that is because we actively look for any time we have a new lens, if you will, or a new focus point for how that can deepen the existing work that we do as social development here in the city, which is really about trying to ensure that we support access to opportunity, to a quality of life that I think most of us aspire to as Torontonians. And this is our ability to focus in on two-spirit, trans, and non-binary young people, and make sure that we're taking that lens into everything that we do as a division moving forward.
Thank you. I do have a few questions, and most of my questions have been answered, which is great. I went through the various action plans, and you had various city departments mentioned in here: TTC, Toronto Public Health, Court Services, the library. But the one department I didn't see, or division that was in here, is Toronto Police. And, you know, non-binary, two-spirited trans youth are often engaged by the police. So why are they not somehow embedded in here?
Oh, Councillor Moyes, I have your questions.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you for that question. You know, we have had many very rich conversations with our colleagues in the police service. As I'm sure you know, they have their 2 LGBTQIA community liaisons who have been hugely supportive, who are thinking about this work as well. And we looked for opportunities to bring them into this plan, and what we found was that our partners embedded internally in our division, in the Community Safety Wellbeing Unit, were a really strong avenue for advancing work in that area. So you'll see that in some of the places where the partner listed is SDFA, Social Development, Finance, and Admin, it's really our Community Safety Wellbeing teams who they work in partnership with the Toronto Police Service more directly.
And if I can add, I would certainly say that given the different governance structure of Toronto Police, it's important that community voices, in addition to our staff-led partnerships, continue on this front so that they can advance the work that they're and their own commitment as well. So I think that's an important piece to this, that community needs to continue the advocacy that you have been doing to ensure that Toronto Police Board understands the importance of this and the opportunity that a plan like this creates for them to increase the work that they do already in partnership with us.
Okay. And just one final question. I know that we're focusing on city divisions and trying to, embed some of these strategies in place, but what about working with our jurisdictions, like the school boards, for example? I mean, we have a school board committee here at the city. I am a former school board trustee myself, and the school board has its own strategies around this issue. Are we working in partnership with the various school boards?
So we certainly have many avenues within our work with the school boards, and I think it's taken time to bring this forward. Our desire is to move to action, and as the word for the day from me is to then deepen. So we certainly hear that, and we'll leverage the opportunities that we have to work with the school board and embed this in the work that we do. Just concretely, so that that you have a better sense of what I mean by that, is we have established probably about a year and a half ago, a Toronto office to prevent violence. And as part of that office, we have staff from multiple institutions beyond the city, including Toronto Police Service and including the TDSB and the Catholic Board. And what that team allows is for an integrated, holistic view of looking at any issue that is about community safety and well-being, and then being able to navigate those very different systems beyond the city in order to make headway. So this is part of what I was describing earlier about the desire on the part of social development to take this lens and embed it in the work that we're doing and accessing the school boards and trying to work with them on this, I think, is an important next step.
Okay, thank you for answering my questions. Seeing no further questions, any speakers on the item? Seeing none, okay. I will then want to thank staff for their great work on this. We're excited to see what comes out of it. And as I think some of the members mentioned, we hope that you'll check in every so often to give us updates as to our progress and maybe make adjustments that were needed if possible. So thank you once again. I'm going to ask Mika to move this item. You okay? Okay, all those in favor of to receive? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. The next item is QS 5.3, Proposed Work Plan Development Exercise 2023 to 2026, Phase 2. We have Toronto Public Health and Social Development Finance and Administration will be presenting their work and its impact on this item. Go ahead. So we have several presentations here, right? So first, just looking at before us, we have Kara Santoki. Is that you? And Nat Rambold, Gender Equity Consultant.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to the members of this committee. So before we pass on to our colleagues from other divisions, we'd like to give a brief reminder about why we're here. My name is Cara Santoki, pronouns are she, her, and I'm the manager of the Gender Equity Unit. And this exercise is to wrap up. This is the final stage of the creation of the work plan for this 2S LGBTQ+ advisory committee. And I will pass to my colleague Nat, who will walk us through where we've been, what we're coming on to now, and then we will pass on to our other divisional colleagues.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all today. My name's Nat, as a reminder. Thanks. My pronouns are they and them. And as Cara said, we're going to be wrapping up our work planning today. So, as you folks may remember, we started the term by identifying our top 6 priorities, and today we are going to narrow that list down to 3. We were hoping to finalize this work at our September meeting, but due to previous loss of quorum, we needed to use our September meeting to catch up on some of our deferred items. We're going to be getting back on track today, which is exciting. Just as a reminder, as we narrow down on our top 3, this is not intended to exclude any other important areas of work, but rather to make progress on some of the key important issues that are identified by this committee. That said, any division may choose to present to us for feedback at any of our meetings as need arises, so in that way the committee can remain flexible and responsive. So we have been going through our current state understanding. So just to recap, we've already heard presentations from our colleagues in Senior Services and Long-Term Care, Toronto Shelter and Support Services, as well as the Housing Secretariat and Employment and Social Services. Each of these teams outlined the work that was happening in their divisions, as well as identifying any work specific to 2S LGBTQ+ communities. Sorry, I just realized my slides aren't changing. Yeah, no worries. All good. Great, thank you so much. So I'll just go back so we can make sure that we have a clear list. So these were our phase 1 revised list of priorities. As I've said, we've covered senior services, housing and shelters, employment, social supports, and poverty reduction in our past work planning. And then today, we are really excited to be hearing from our colleagues in newcomer and settlement services, public health, and community safety. So following the presentations today, as I said, we will be engaging in some discussion to determine what our top 3 priority areas are from within that list. Again, we invite you to consider both where the greatest community need is based on your own experience and knowledge, as well as where you think this committee can make the greatest impact. Then, based on our understanding of the determined priorities, we are going to invite each of the 3 divisions back for a more focused and in-depth work planning session. This may involve advising on specific policy or program implementation, raising community-specific issues in the subject area, advancing subject-specific motions, and providing feedback. The intention of the work plan is to create an opportunity for proactive instead of reactive 2S LGBTQ+ and focused work, to leverage the experience of the committee, and to advise staff who are working in important areas. Following our discussion today, program staff will work with the selected divisions to create a report back schedule. Through the chair, are there any questions from our members on the work plan before we invite up our colleagues to present?
If there are questions online, just unmute yourself and speak. I'm not able to see you right now. Hearing none, you may continue.
Perfect. Okay, so I will invite up our colleagues from Toronto Public Health, followed by our colleagues in community safety and well-being, and then our colleagues from the newcomer office. I will ask that you folks can ask a couple questions following each of the presentations if you have them, but we will have a robust discussion following that in which we will be able to determine our top 3 priorities. So I'll pass it over to my colleagues in Toronto Public Health.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here in person today to present 2 LGBTQ+ initiatives being undertaken by Toronto Public Health. My name is Sana Imran, and I am joined by Angela Fong. We are both Associate Directors working within the Strategy and Clinical Services Directorate with Toronto Public Health. Before we start, I want to acknowledge that the ideas and the recommendations that we're presenting here today are a result of collaboration across the directorates within Toronto Public Health, especially our communications and consultation with key partners in the Pride community. We want to extend our sincere thanks to them for their time, their dedication, and their support. We will provide a brief introduction to this work at Toronto Public Health, some of the key initiatives that have been pursued since our recovery efforts related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the goals that we as an organization have identified to endeavor towards. As some of you may be familiar, Toronto Public Health released the 2024 to 2028 strategic plan with a renewed mission to protect and improve health at the population level, while reducing health inequities. Key priorities identified were to strengthen health protection, disease prevention, and emergency preparedness, promote health and well-being across the lifespan, promote the conditions to support positive mental health and reduce the harms of substance use, advocate to advance health equity, and nurture a positive workplace culture. Toronto Public Health also released a new mental health and substance use strategy for the City of Toronto in 2023 titled Our Health, Our City, which outlines how pre-existing health inequities experienced by the 2S LGBTQ+ community were further exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, and key goals were identified to better support the growing needs. As part of this goal and commitment by Toronto Public Health, the senior leadership team endorsed recommendations brought forward by a committee within the organization to take a community-informed approach to build and strengthen meaningful relationships within the 2S LGBTQ+ community. A significant step in this was the participation in the Pride Street Fair in 2024 and the development of a comprehensive strategy to further this work beyond the Pride Month. Angela will speak more to this now.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Angela Fong, as my colleague Sana introduced, and my pronouns are she and her. So some of the key initiatives that were identified and endorsed by our senior management team included to take a community-informed approach to build trust and reduce stigma, to promote overall health and well-being, not just sexual health and the prevention of infectious diseases, and to foster an inclusive and informed workplace. Some of the activities that centered around taking a community-informed approach to build trust and stigma were reaching out to the community themselves. And what we heard is that traditionally, 2S LGBTQ+ folks and public health have had a strained relationship, and both parties have acknowledged this. Pride Toronto in particular, excuse me, described their past interactions with Toronto Public Health as transactional, one and done, and inconsistent at times. And on both parts, there is a true desire to build and strengthen meaningful relationships with TPH beyond just Pride Month alone. And again, in consultation with Pride Toronto, as well as Gay Men's Sexual Health Alliance, GMSH, TPH crafted and shared key public health messages on harm reduction and safer partying in a way that was inclusive, culturally informed, and free from shame and stigma. On the initiative of promoting overall health and well-being, not just sexual health, this year Pride Month activities engage staff from across the organization beyond the usual programs. And what I mean by usual programs are those programs focused on sexual health. Also, for the first time, TPH participated in Family Pride, a lovely event geared for children 0 to 12 and their families. At the Pride Street Fair, we provided supplies such as external and internal condoms, lube, dental dams, as well as oral health supplies such as toothbrushes, in addition to naloxone kits and other harm reduction supplies. And of course, given that we are public health, we provided public health positive messaging regarding the ongoing response to the rising cases of Mpox. With respect to fostering an inclusive and informed workplace, what we can do now and what we did is to participate in the street festival and deliver public education campaigns. For staff, we held a virtual professional development event in partnership with Toronto Archives on the queer history in Toronto. We encourage virtual and in-person training opportunities such as understanding gender and sexual orientation. And we are providing staff education on relevant policies such as the Sexual Health Philosophy and Guiding Principles, which is a unique policy applicable to all TPH employees. As we move into the future, here are some of our goals. The first is to hold a 2S LGBTQ+ staff spotlight series, put together a TPH Pride Network, ensure that gender and sexual diversity training is mandatory for all staff, build stronger and more meaningful relationships, and increase trust with the community, partners, and those with lived experience, and continue to develop a consistent approach to addressing the population health needs of the 2S LGBTQ+ community. TPH intends to carry and demonstrate their commitment to this community by being committed to meaningful allyship, supporting 2S LGBTQ+ mental health and wellness across the lifespan, celebrating gender and sexual diversity among staff, and engaging in continuous learning to support positive organizational culture change. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you. Any questions for public health? Again, you can unmute yourself and speak freely.
Thank you, Chair. My question to the Toronto Public Health Committee is, what initiatives are they or will they be vis-a-vis general health outside of sexual health, addictions, and infection prevention? What initiatives are in place or perhaps considered for general health vis-a-vis the rainbow community? Thank you.
Through the chair, Pink Angel, thank you so much for the question. I think it's an excellent question. Toronto Public Health is in a bit of a unique position in 2024, given that we are still undergoing our recovery efforts from the COVID-19 pandemic. So there are many goals that we have identified, and as you'll see in our strategic plan, which was only released earlier this year, we are working closely with community partners. We have ongoing relationships with a lot of agencies within the community that are focused more on general health and what we can do to support them. An example would be in Mpox and the rise in cases and how we're working closely to ensure that they have access to vaccines that are required. So there are different directorates across the agency that are undergoing this work. And it will continue to be a focus of ours as we continue our recovery after COVID-19. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Pink Angel, for the question. Sexual health promotion efforts at Toronto Public Health do focus and have historically focused on work across the lifespan, and I can provide a little bit of more detail about that. The sexual health promotion team in particular has a very special program called Raising Sexually Healthy Children. And within that program, it teaches parents, families, and child care service providers and caregivers about the importance about sexual health development in the context of safety. And so another workshop that is provided by our sexual health promotion team to the community as part of an education campaign is around bodies, boundaries, and safety. We talk about gender diverse families, that in the childcare setting and in school communities, little people might see different types of families, and that is okay. So starting from a young age, being able to talk openly about these issues really promotes, ideas and acceptance and inclusivity before actual sexual health topics are discussed later in life.
Thank you. Any further questions? Mark has a question. Go ahead, Mark.
I'm just wondering about the sexual public health in the schools and how this relates to the work they're doing there. If there's anything specific.
Thank you, Vice Chair, for the question. Our sexual health promotion team partners regularly with our school liaison public health nurses who are in the school communities, supporting a variety of public health needs amongst the students and supporting our school communities and administrative staff in those areas. So we do support teachers as well as provide professional development opportunities around sexual health education, but also around the development of healthy relationships, which is very key when we're talking about these issues, particularly around young people and youth in this community.
Okay, thank you. I have one question. On the future goals, you have TPH Pride Network. And I know there's a Black Staff Network. Is there a queer staff network, a 2S LGBTQ plus staff network in the city? Is there? Okay, I wasn't quite sure because I've actually never heard of it. So this will be specific to public health.
Yes, this would be specific to public health.
And how does that feed into the broader network we have in the city?
That's an excellent question, Mr. Chair. This is a brand new initiative that the Toronto Public Health has recommended this year, just before Pride was starting, and was one of the key initiatives endorsed by the senior leadership team. So the work now will be understanding how would this feed in and support the larger network that exists, and how do we work together and ensure that there isn't extra work being done, but also everybody is finding their place within this.
Okay, my concern is working in silos, right?
Absolutely.
I don't want it to be duplicated, and it's a competition across systems. The one thing I dislike about this place is the silos that we work in all the time. Okay, that's just a sidebar. Thank you. Any further questions? Terrence, I know you're driving. Maybe you should pull to the side and then ask you a question. You have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Hands-free devices. I just won't look at my screen. I'm driving, but I can still talk because it's Bluetooth. Hey, thanks for that. And I had 2 questions. One was in regards to partners. I know you'd mentioned, Pride Toronto, and I was curious if you had a list of partners that you have engaged, because there was some that came to mind that if you haven't been engaging would be great for the work you're looking to do. Additionally, the second question is, you had mentioned internally doing some pieces in regards to your own like TPH culture and staff supports and all that jazz, awareness, equity, all that jazz. And then I was wondering, in regards to that, have you done anything to really assess what the environment is like within your own work culture? So maybe like some kind of climate scan or something like that. So those are my 2 questions.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for showing your hands, because you're not texting and driving or no distracted driving. So to address your first question regarding a partner list, Pride Toronto and GMSH are just 2 of the community partners that we consulted. Certainly there is a longer list, if you will. However, I do want to acknowledge that TPH, as well as the rest of the Toronto community, has changed a lot since the COVID pandemic, and staffing has changed over time. And so a lot of the relationships and the partners that we had prior to the pandemic are no longer, for various reasons. And so we're working very hard in an effort to rebuild those relationships, meet the new faces in the community. And so we're very open to, making those connections. So if you have a list or recommendations for additional agencies, we're happy and open to hear it. The second piece about internal assessment regarding our internal staff, that's a great point. Every year within TPH, we hold an employee engagement survey, and we take valuable information from that survey to inform employee engagement efforts for the year. And so one of the surveys that we will embark in is inclusivity, in assessing if staff feel that they are well educated and comfortable with 2S LGBTQ+ community and related topics.
Thank you. Seeing no further okay. Absequin, go ahead.
Thank you. So, question about the section where you spoke about stigma, and with respect to less of a focus on sexual health and more of a focus on overall health. So removing the word sexual, let's focus on health, overall health. So my question is, where does language come to play in this? Because I feel, and I don't know, who creates the names for, Toronto Public Health in terms of like what information and how it's being shared, but the terminology, particularly the terminology around monkeypox and mpox, was incredibly stigmatizing for Two-Spirit LGBTQ+ peoples, but particularly for Indigenous peoples who have a long history with illness, particularly with smallpox related illness. And so my question for Toronto Public Health is, how is language woven into this plan and changing the language to be less stigmatizing, particularly for Indigenous and racialized peoples? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I'm really grateful to you for raising this. I will say this plan is very much in its infancy, and so this is absolutely an opportunity for us to look at the language and to look at how our communications team is supporting us with this work as well. We have some excellent staff that we will go to and take this back. So I appreciate your feedback on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, Ranjit, go ahead.
Yeah, quick question. When I was doing weekly workshops for LGBTQ+ newcomers, I used to access Toronto Public Health dental care services, especially for their outreach workers. And they used to come to our workshop sessions and deliver really amazing sessions on dental care, dental hygiene, dental health. And I realized that that service is no longer available. Is it available? Is there any plan to, if it is not there, any plan to start it again? Because these nurses, dental healthcare outreach workers were so effective and they knew what they were talking about. It was very, very useful. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. If I understood correctly, you were referring specifically to outreach workers within the dental clinical services. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. Thank you. I hate to be a broken record on this, but I will say that due to the COVID-19 recovery efforts, we have staff that are still reintegrating back into our clinical services, dental being one example. And so we haven't fully launched some of the outward-facing programs that we used to have simply because there's so much recovery happening internally. I will say, to speak to Mr. Chair's reference earlier about silos, we are working to understand how to integrate better within TPH. As an example, we now have an outreach worker dedicated between the works and our dental team so that their clients that are coming into the works are also being able to access dental care, which they may not have felt comfortable before, but having an outreach worker dedicated to support them, we've seen a lot of success through that. So this is on our recovery plan as well, and it is being worked through. So thank you for that feedback too. We'll be sure to take that back.
Okay, thank you. Next team. Yeah, that's it. I think that's it. Okay. There's another team coming up, right, for presentation? SafeTO, Mohammed. Thank you, Public Health. Mohammed Shuri, and Director of Community Safety and Wellbeing, and Scott McKean, Associate Director of Violence Prevention and SafeTO. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me just get my notes going. We're here to talk to you about the city's community safety and well-being plan. We'll share just a little bit on that plan, and then as part of the broader work plan that was shared earlier. My name is Mohammed Shuri. I'm the Director of Community Safety and Wellbeing. My pronouns are he, him. I'm joined by my colleague Scott McKean, the Associate Director of Violence Prevention and SafeTO, and his pronouns are he, him as well. We're updating you today on the city's 10-year community safety well-being plan called SafeTO. This is a legislatively required plan mandated by the provincial government that the City of Toronto passed in July of 2021. The plan was informed by extensive community consultations in late 2020 and early 2021, including 2,500 stakeholders engaged in our city, as well as a survey of 1,500 responses. It included partnerships with community organizations across various different equity-seeking communities, including the 2S LGBTQ community. Community advocates, academics, and residents have called for a fundamental shift in the way the city thinks about community safety by centering the well-being of people and places while factoring in inequities and other root causes that are threatening safety and well-being. The SafeTO Action Plan, the 10-year Community Safety Wellbeing Plan, brings about a safe Toronto that promotes and celebrates well-being and resilience of all residents by, number one, expanding the definition of community safety and well-being beyond crime or policing to include well-being, redefining what trauma means and deepening the ability of the city and its partners to be informed by it and respond to it. Number three, enhancing our ability to act early and advance preventative approaches. Number four, developing innovative mechanisms to use in multi-sectoral data to inform decisions and integrate investments. 5, implementing an effective multi-sectoral governance structure that brings our critical partners into coordinated leadership and action. And 6, committing to a long-term vision of community safety and well-being and a comprehensive plan to realize it. The Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan provides a roadmap for how the city and social systems that serve Torontonians, such as community services, healthcare systems, education systems, and justice systems, police and businesses can work collaboratively across different sectors and across government to support community safety and well-being. Turn to the next slide. The plan involves 26 priority actions that are in 7 big buckets of strategic goals. Number 1, to reduce vulnerability. 2, to reduce violence. 3, to advance truth and reconciliation commitments. 4, to promote healing and justice. 5, to invest in people. 6, to invest in neighborhoods. And 7, to drive collaboration and accountability. The broader work of the Community Safety and Wellbeing Action Plan is driven by SDF&A as the host of this plan, but we work collaboratively with all our partners within the city, as well as Toronto Police Services and other city agencies and boards and commissions to advance these actions. My colleague Scott will walk us through some of the priority actions in the first phase of the work, as well as some of our specific 2S LGBTQ focused actions.
Good morning, and thank you for the committee for having us here today. The first phase of implementation prioritized 4 main areas. The first was the implementation of the Toronto Community Crisis Service. This is a non-police, community-based, client-focused, and trauma-informed response to mental health and crisis calls that often respond to calls for service and conduct wellness checks. The approach has recently expanded citywide and has received nearly 18,000 calls for service since its implementation, and dispatched mobile crisis teams for more than 15,000 times to provide in-person mental health supports. And the model has also made more than 5,700 referrals to culturally responsive mental health services, substance use, and housing services. We've also established the Violence Prevention Toronto office, an integrated office that consists of embedded staff from the City of Toronto, Toronto Police Service, the Toronto Community Housing Corporation, Toronto District School Board, TTC, local businesses, and other funded institutions and programs that are working collaboratively to sort of guide our work through trauma-informed, responsive public health approach to how we prevent violence in our city, how we intervene in violence, and how we respond and recover from it. This is the first of its kind office in Toronto, and we'll be working to test a theory of change that focuses on bringing multiple agencies, institutions, and partners together to really have a multi-sector approach to how we prevent violence in the City of Toronto. The office is currently testing that theory of change and hopes to apply it to other forms of violence. Our current priority is gun violence in the city, and we'll be using the similar methodology to work with our colleagues in People and Equity as they pursue the gender-based intimate partner violence work. The expansion of our Community Crisis Response Program to violence, and we're expanding that program to be a 7-day-a-week model that is currently offered by the city and supplemented by community investments. In 2023, the program has responded to 600 violent traumatic critical incidents, which include 348 firearm-related incidents and 241 stabbings. And in 2024, between the period of January 1st to August 30th, the program had responded to 295 firearm-related incidents and 146 stabbings. Expanding the model to 7-day-a-week, a 7-day-a-week model will enhance our ability to support those who are victimized by violence of all shapes and sizes in our city. We've also established the SafeTO Collaborative Analytics and Learning Environment, or what we call SCALE. And this is a multi-sector data analytics lab that is working to link data sets together so we can proactively identify prevention strategies and also approach look at prevention approaches comprehensively. The linking of data sets allows us to look at issues in our city more holistically and bring the right partners to support communities. The work of scale is allowing us to create better opportunities for us to measure the impact of our work and the ongoing implementation of SafeTO. We're also working on emerging priorities in community safety and well-being, such as on transit in schools with businesses through our SafeTO BIA pilot, and our working with our partners in P&E on gender-based and intimate partner violence, among many others. We will be bringing forward the next phase of this work and our work plan in 2025, and we'll come back to the committee to update. Go to the next slide, Mo. What's really important to note is that SafeTO, when we built it, you heard from Mo about how many community members and all the involvement of community in the design and implementation of the plan. They also helped us identify 6 guiding principles for how we implement SafeTO. And they are woven through every single action that we're moving forward, including prioritizing an equity and human rights-based approach to this work. We are currently working with these principles and centering them in all of our implementation. You heard today about the Two-Spirit and non-binary youth, Two-Spirit, trans and non-binary youth plan, and we have committed to actions within that work. The city's commitments to address gender-based and intimate partner violence and calls for justice on the National Inquiry in Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls work. We are working with our colleagues with the Indigenous Affairs Office, People in Equity, and many community partners on advancing and scoping that work. Looking at how we provide wraparound supports for justice involved to us LGBTQ+ individuals involved in the justice system through our partnership with the Ministry of Attorney General's Justice Centers is an ongoing priority. And really tailored service mental health supports for to us LGBTQ+ populations through the Toronto Community Crisis Service and Focus Toronto, and really working to build the capacity of agencies and community service providers to better serve this population. Thank you so much, and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Mo. Any questions from the members? Pink Angel, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to SafeTO for the presentation. My question is there any mechanism through SafeTO to report physical violence or any other types of violence, given that the rainbow community is particularly at risk and at increased harm, particularly the trans community, the Black trans community, and the Two-Spirited Indigenous community. Is there any reporting mechanism? Because I myself had experienced physical violence on the TTC and on the street, and I called, whilst on the TTC, I activated the emergency band, the yellow band, and the train stopped at Ossington Station, and the TTC officer came to the car, to the particular car that I was in, and removed the assaulter, and told the assaulter to stay in place, but the assaulter left the station, and the Toronto police, TTC police were called. They took a report and asked me if I wanted the person in charge, and I said yes, but nothing came of it. So what happened at that incident is that the assaulter left the station. So that means they cannot now follow up on that person who assaulted me. And I went many times to TPS to ask about the status of that case. and I have the case number and everything, but nothing has come of it. So my question is, if there was a reporting mechanism to SafeTO, and what follow-up is there of any kind, if that's in place? Thank you.
Maybe I can start that. My colleague Scott can add. I want to first off acknowledge that incident and give you my regrets to hear about such a horrible thing happening to you. And I'm sorry to hear that had happened to you. Secondly, I think broadly, SafeTO is a collaboration across multiple entities, including Toronto Police Services and the TTC. So we work closely with them. They oversee and they specifically guide the work of their special constables in the example of TTC. And in the example of Toronto Police, they guide the police officers who do the investigations and the follow-ups. We will take this back and share with them and see what opportunities there are for us to improve a broader awareness for the 2S LGBTQ community to understand how to file complaints, but also what I'm hearing through your question is more transparency in how these complaints are handled and resolved.
Thank you. I also want to acknowledge that it's a terrible incident, and we're sorry to hear about it. The other channels, in addition to Toronto Police Service, so obviously that's a crime and there is an investigation. Unfortunately, there is no, you haven't received follow-up, but they do have an occurrence number, and so they would be investigating that claim. And so that's best answered by the police service. The only other outlets to report are through TTC itself with the Safe TTC app, because they can also collect information, but they would have documented that when you press the yellow bar, and so the special constables would be following up on that as well. And so that's the only other reporting mechanism. What I would share with you is that in addition to reporting, the TTC is working with us and have integrated teams of, different kind of providers that are working with the TTC on specific routes and specific places. And so we're trying to use data and experience, the unfortunate experiences of individuals like you to sort of advise where they should be. So we'll take that back, as Mo said, not only to the police service, but also to the TTC. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from the presenters? I see that Ranjit has his hands up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much for the presentation. I want to add 2 points. One is, the first one is that it's a glorified myth that policing is a way for safety. That is a glorified myth. And recently, our Premier of Ontario made this very controversial remark, and get your ASS and get some work for unhoused communities. So what I'm saying is that poverty is, we need to handle or tackle poverty. It's a multi-sector approach we need to have, and you mentioned a holistic approach, which is a good thing. So how are you connecting with various stakeholders and communities to deal with things like poverty? Because the moment there is poverty, there is all kinds of other issues that are unsafe for everybody, for the people who are dealing with these issues and for the rest. And in particular, Two-Spirit and LGBTQ plus communities, newcomers and young people are, as a percentage, living in poverty. So that is one aspect of it that needs to be addressed simultaneously if we are to ensure safety. The other one is the rising trends of racism. Anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Black racism, anti-Asian racism, and all kinds of hate speeches are being legitimized by various audiences, leaderships, and they impact the communities, especially trans, 2S, queer communities, and Black and racialized people. So these are the things that needs to be addressed concurrently and have a wider approach when you are tackling safe Toronto. I want to highlight these factors and also get your view on how you connect and work with multiple agencies and stakeholders on these. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. And through the chair, it's a well-made point that these are broader systemic challenges that have to be addressed, specifically in terms of addressing poverty and specifically addressing discrimination of all forms. So Scott and I are lucky enough to work within Social Development and Finance Administration, where some of these broader strategies that are addressing these issues are housed in. Specifically, our poverty reduction unit is in our division, and they are developing and leading some of this broader work, and we work closely with them. And specifically, our Confronting Anti-Black Racism unit, which is leading specifically anti-Black racism actions to be taken by the city. And there will be a 10-year action plan shared shortly. But taking a step back more generally, all our work involves engaging local community groups and specifically populations made most vulnerable. So we work specifically with Indigenous populations seeking reconciliation, but also work specifically with 2S LGBTQ groups, Black communities, and other communities seeking access to city services to identify through our service partners, both as an example TTC, but specifically another example to give is the Downtown East Action Plan, which is part of our work, where we have specific enhanced investments in that neighborhood to identify supports required in that neighborhood and targeting those supports to those specific communities. So as part of our broader work, we're informed by these approaches, and we feed into and work closely with the city's broader strategic actions that fall under poverty reduction and specifically fall under some of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Action Plan, as well as some of the city's broader anti-hate, addressing anti-hate and discrimination work through things like the Toronto for All campaign around allyship, but also coordinated supports to residents who are impacted by anti-hate crimes through funding made available through our Community Crisis Response Fund and other initiatives such as that. And maybe my colleague Scott may add a few more additional supports that we provide.
The only thing I would say is to your point around poverty, 100%. So we have the poverty reduction strategy for the city. And when it comes to community safety, what's different about SafeTO is historically we thought about safety as crime, where now we are centering the well-being of people and places in the very definition and how we think about safety. And that includes poverty. And if that is left unattended to your point that you articulated, that can manifest into safety and well-being challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, we'll go to the last presenters. Thank you. Toronto Newcomer Office from Francesca Bicora, Policy Development Officer, and Barbara Bichart, Senior Project Manager from the Toronto Newcomer Office.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. Thank you for your patience as we got set up. My name is Francesca Pecora. I'm a Policy Development Officer with the Toronto Newcomer Office, and my pronouns are she and her.
Good morning, everybody. I'm a Senior Project Manager with the Toronto Newcomer Office. My name is Barb Beshra. My pronouns are they, them. I'm also the co-chair of the Corporate City of Toronto's Pride Network.
So today we will provide a brief overview of the Toronto Newcomer Office's work and mandate, as well as highlighting our current initiatives that are related to us LGBTQ+ newcomer communities, and talk a bit about the future direction of our unit. So the Toronto Newcomer Office was established in 2013 within the Social Development, Finance and Administration Division. We are a citywide local immigration partnership, which basically means that we are primarily funded by the federal government, so immigration, refugee, citizenship, and Canada. Local immigration partnerships work to improve the successful integration of immigrants in their communities by convening partners across key sectors in a particular city or region. And so as Toronto's citywide local immigration partnership, the Newcomer Office brings together organizations in partnership, so specifically settlement-oriented organizations that strive to make Toronto a more welcoming and equitable place for newcomers. There are 4 quadrant local immigration partnerships in the city, so north, south, east, and west, and our office then works as a citywide lip to bring those quadrant networks together. One important thing to note is that we do not offer direct services to residents, but we are responsible for the implementation of City Council approved policies, such as the Toronto Newcomer Strategy, which spans from 2022 until 2026. The renewed strategy is a roadmap for achieving a greater impact for newcomer success, and the vision of the strategy is that newcomers living in Toronto have a sense of belonging, of well-being and connectedness, that they feel safe, supported, welcome, and engaged, and that the city is a leader in providing newcomers equitable access to municipal programs and services. We are also responsible for the implementation of the Refugee Capacity Plan. So in November of 2017, City Council directed the development of this capacity plan. The purpose of the capacity plan is to facilitate seamless, efficient, and fast mobilization of resources and supports during periods of significant increases in refugee arrivals to Toronto. These are specifically unforeseen arrivals. So we're really talking about folks that are arriving in Canada or Toronto and making a claim upon their arrival. And we are also responsible for the Refugee Resettlement Program, which was approved by City Council in 2015 and aims to facilitate coordination, communication, and information exchange, specifically for government-assisted refugees. So these are populations that have refugee status upon arrival. From 2015 to 2017, contributed to the successful settlement of 7,000 Syrian refugees. And the plan was reactivated in August of 2021 to support Afghan resettlement efforts, and in 2022 to support Ukrainian arrivals. And then the last point, we're also responsible for the implementation of access to city services for undocumented Torontonians, which was first adopted by City Council in 2013. The Access TO policy outlines that Torontonians, regardless of their immigration status, should have access to municipal services without fear of being asked for proof of status. The areas of service that fall within the scope of the Access TO policy that have the highest interaction include the shelter system, libraries, community and recreation centers, and then childcare services. It's just important, we'll take a moment just to distinguish between the municipal role in immigration compared to other levels of government. So Canada's immigration system is under the jurisdiction of the federal and provincial governments, but cities play a critical role in the successful settlement of newcomers. The City of Toronto provides key programs and services, including housing, emergency shelter, employment services, transit, childcare, parks and recs, and public health services that are critical for newcomer well-being. And Toronto has a very robust settlement sector. Most settlement organizations are funded by the federal government, so again, by IRCC. However, it's important to note that refugee claimants are not eligible to receive settlement services that are funded by the federal government. So as such, many of the settlement and community agencies in Toronto that are providing services to this population are doing so through other sources of funding. And settlement sector partners offer services that might include employment supports, assistance for looking for housing, language classes, support with school registration, and more.
Thanks for that. So we're going to just share a little bit about some of the immigration trends that we're seeing and that impact the experiences of newcomers in Toronto and also settlement services in the city. So we see about 500,000, so 500,000 immigrants entering Canada each year. And that doesn't include the folks we see on this chart. Those are often economic immigrants or economic migrants. Those folks tend to have the capability, the capacity to find their way and not lean on city support such as for their immediate needs, so things like emergency financial assistance, shelter assistance. One of the trends that we are seeing and we continue to see is the increase in arrivals of refugees and specifically folks who are claiming asylum once they arrive in Canada. And those with temporary statuses, so that includes international students and migrant workers who are needing support when they've arrived or after they may have been here for a while. So the chart you see in front of you is the number of asylum claims in Canada from the year 2000 to the year 2023. You'll notice there are a couple of low years in 2020 and 2021. Those numbers do not reflect a lack of need across the world. Those numbers just simply reflect the closing of borders during the COVID-19 pandemic, where movement across the world was greatly reduced, and so that's why those 2 years are low. But otherwise, you see quite a large trend from the early 2010s until today, where the number of folks entering Canada and claiming asylum has been increasing exponentially each year. In 2023, we saw about 144,000 asylum claims made in Canada. This year, based on the trends we're seeing, that number will be closer to 180 to 190,000 claims made in Canada. So for reference, about 10 years ago, we were seeing 15,000 claims made in the whole year. Now we're seeing more than that each month. IRCC doesn't provide municipal level data on where the folks land who are making asylum claims in Canada. We know that many of them land at the international airports, so a lot come through Pearson and many stay in Toronto. As Francesca was saying, Toronto does have quite a robust settlement sector here, so there are a lot of supports, which means a lot of migrants do stay here for those supports, as well as having communities that reflect themselves and that making this city feel like a welcome place for them. Migrants do, or asylum claimants and migrants do tend to travel outside of Toronto since we are facing a housing crisis to try to find more affordable places to live. And we do see folks having secondary migration coming back to Toronto because those communities didn't feel welcoming or didn't have the supports they needed at the time. Another stat that's interesting, so while there are so many folks coming in, we have almost 200,000 asylum claimants pending review, and that number is increasing each year as the number of arrivals increases each year. So those are the folks that have made their claim, but they haven't had a chance to go through the IRB to see if their claim is successful or not. So there are more and more people waiting in limbo who are living in the city. We have seen a trend of LGBTQ refugees coming in through Canada as part of the asylum program. So people facing persecution in their home country because of their sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression, or SOGI, can seek refugee protection in Canada. So as we've seen laws against LGBTQ folks increasing across the world, and particularly in African nations, we're seeing more and more folks fleeing to Canada for safety. So our office does support LGBTQ newcomers in a number of ways. As Francesca said, we don't do direct service, but we do have a big role in coordinating community agencies and doing intergovernmental work. So part of our intergovernmental work right now is working on a tri-level agreement or tri-level document that can bring Toronto, Ontario, and Canada closer together in how we coordinate support for asylum claimants who are coming into the city. And one of the big pieces, as Francesca said, IRCC does not financially support folks who haven't made a claim yet. Your claim has to be accepted before you can get any kind of support, and so we're seeing more and more folks who are making inland claims or making claims later. And so we're really working on ways that we can fill that gap intergovernmentally to better work together so that we don't see newcomers falling through the gaps. We have a refugee capacity plan, so that includes a city community agency table. We have representation and inclusion by and for LGBTQ community organizations such as the 519 and the African Center for Refugees sitting on those tables. We acknowledge this is an ongoing effort to build more comprehensive support systems through community-based feedback and the integration of lived experience. The table ensures that the city is hearing from refugee-serving agencies that are equipped to meet the unique needs of queer refugees and helps to identify and address gaps in services, particularly those for those newcomers who are experiencing intersectional marginalization. It also acknowledges sharing and referrals among a larger group. So we work to really bring folks together to be able to share information from the community up to each level of government and to share what each level of government may be doing or what they may need to do back to community. Through our Access TO trainings, as Francesca had said, we incorporate a 2S LGBTQ+ lens into the trainings to ensure that city staff gain some knowledge on the unique needs, barriers, and experiences of queer newcomers, and those with precarious status or without status. Each year we host Toronto Newcomer Day. It happens in May every year in the square outside. We welcome about 10,000 people to the square. It's really one of our marquee events of the year, and it's a really important event for connecting all newcomers to essential services. We have about 150 community organizations who have, as part of the information fair in the square, where they can connect directly with community members. We have specific efforts in that to ensure that queer newcomers feel welcome and included. We have targeted outreach to queer newcomers as well to ensure that they have a presence there. We have 2S LGBTQ+ service providers and community organizations at the event. For example, the 519 is there, as well as Franco Queer and many others. And we also have had 2S LGBTQ folks who are leading some of the activations on site as well. And then we heard of the amazing access plan for Two-Spirit trans non-binary youth. There were some really wonderful questions that came up from the committee about how newcomers are included in that. And there were questions throughout today. We really appreciate folks here bringing in the angle of newcomers into all the work that the city does. And so we've contributed to that plan, and many pieces of that action plan will inform our work moving forward. So looking ahead, this is just some of the work we see that is going to be important in Toronto to ensure that LGBTQ newcomers' needs are met. So we need to see a community-led approach which recognizes that initiatives supporting queer newcomers must be led by and for community and centering the lived experience in all phases of planning and implementation of that work. We'd love to see a dedicated task force. We've heard from many community partners. They're proposing the creation of a separate task force, separate from the city leading it. And we've heard that mainly through our city community agency table. And that's really going to mobilize resources and develop targeted solutions for the queer newcomer community, and particularly refugee claimants. LGBTQ+ community partner organizations have put their hand up to lead the work, and our office has offered support in getting this started, and we would participate as a citywide local immigration partnership in any task force that does come up. You want to do the last one? Sure.
And then lastly, I'll just speak to this point since it's one of my portfolios. One of the strategies in the Toronto Newcomer one of the priorities in the Toronto Newcomer Strategy are newcomer access plans. And so what we're doing is working across the corporation to look at services, programs, and policies that the city delivers. And so we would like to look at those and see if there are any barriers that newcomers specifically might face, and in collaboration with our partners across the city, see how we can address those. And in this work, we are planning to do consultations, and so we will be making sure that there will be representation from 2S LGBTQ+ newcomers in those consultations. Thank you, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Francesca and Barb. Any questions from the members?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much for that presentation. So I'm just going to start by saying that I arrived as a postdoctorate researcher in Canada maybe 4 to 5 years ago. And I arrived as an economic immigrant through an economic express visa. And when I arrived here, the situation that I was in, that I noticed, there were a lot of services that were focusing on a lot more vulnerable people than I was, and a lot of services that were focusing on a lot more privileged people than I was. But I noticed that young Arab, Muslim, racialized, cultural bodies, young professionals like myself definitely often fall through the cracks. And what happened is in my first 2 years of Toronto, I became more marginalized and I became more vulnerable. And I fell from the category of a professional that had a postdoctorate, that was overqualified, could not get references, could not get networking opportunities, could not get any type of capacity building or connection. And I became more vulnerable by arriving here. So I just want to, ask the question of how are you making sure that these folks that are coming here with a bare minimum sometimes of education or a bare minimum of privilege, that's just enough to get their feet up, how are we focusing on them as well and making sure that these folks that can actually build up local economic development projects, that can build up the economy, that can help more marginalized people, that we're not marginalizing them further and pushing them further into the abyss?
I'll start and then I'll let Barb jump in. Thank you. For sharing. I think that your experience is one that we hear of, unfortunately, too often. And there are many, many barriers to employment, even for newcomers that are selected based on, what the federal government sort of, decides as in terms of like our economic needs. We work very closely with the settlement sector, as mentioned, and there are a lot of employment-focused organizations in Toronto that are working specifically to support people in getting access, to employment support services. So whether that's like preparation for interviews and just navigating this very new landscape. We also partner with TRIAC. We have a mentorship program that's actually it happens every year, and it's about to launch again, where City of Toronto employees can sign up to participate and become mentors for newcomers that are looking for employment opportunities and just kind of need to learn the basic kind of lay of the land. So those are a couple things that come to mind. Do you want to jump in, Barb?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that question. I think it's a really important one. So our office also supports our annual refugee hiring event in the city, where we bring together employers that are ready to hire folks. They have to support candidates. There are resume writing workshops ahead of time, and resumes are submitted ahead of the event. And the event is really an opportunity for those employers to meet potential candidates in person, interview them, and hire them on the spot, or follow up for interviews in the future. We work closely with Toronto Employment and Social Services. So the City of Toronto, along with other corporate partners, are part of the Mentoring Partnership, which is a consortium of community agencies to match occupation professionals with internationally trained professionals living in Toronto who need help finding a job in their specialized field or occupation. So that's one of the programs that's available. Toronto Employment and Social Services has many supports for newcomers around employment, financial aid, and service navigation. The Ontario government funds programs that address labor integration, and so community agencies do share with us if there are folks with specific backgrounds that may need supports, and the current programs aren't covering them because the provincial government will often look at where there may be gaps in kind of the economic sector, which doesn't always reflect who's actually here and needs work. And so we can share the information up if we're seeing that there are populations or groups of folks with certain international credentials or education that may need support in finding work. Yeah, I think those are a few of the examples.
Thank you. Okay. Go ahead, a quick follow-up, Jade.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. Thank you for that. I would just say in terms of labor integration, there are some organizations like Marginalized Majority and other organizations that are doing a lot of nuanced work, such as embodied safety and imposter syndrome and things that psychosocial and emotional issues that also affect the deep integration of newcoming immigrants into the workforce. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ranjit, you had 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for this work, and I have quick suggestions and some questions. One is, as I mentioned before, for refugee claimants, access to healthcare. Asylum seekers, before they file refugee claim applications, there is virtually no access to healthcare. Competent and safe healthcare, especially for Black, racialized, towards LGBTQ plus refugees and newcomers. And that is where we really need to work together, work together in the sense, work together with the shelters, with community agencies, and with the CHC sector, community health services sector, to increase these accessibilities. Because you also mentioned that services for undocumented Torontonians is one of your areas of focus, which is so good. I would like to know more about it. The other thing is, my work has been with LGBTQ plus refugees and newcomers. So one of the first things I noticed was that they come with the notion that Canada is a safe haven, and I validate their feelings and their thoughts, feelings, and their experiences coming from very precarious situations from where they're coming from. Now, this is where the conflict is that I had. Now, when they come to Canada and they somehow resettle, go through all these challenges, barriers, and violences, and they resettle. But their knowledge, there is no access or avenue for them to know about the first peoples of this land, Indigenous peoples. And whenever I talk about Indigenous people, I talk as an as a learner, lifelong learner, and a co-conspirator. So one of the things I did was, in every program that I organized, to have an educational component about Indigenous peoples. It could be a short video clip. Sometimes I used to invite Two-Spirit Indigenous peoples and elders to our programs, not just as a way of like tokenistic gesture, but to engage, but to give this knowledge that do not come from the mainstream resettlement services or programs, including the Discover Canada guide that they have to study when they become Canadian citizens. So these are the things I would like to highlight, that as a policy framework. Now, before going into the fun part of reconciliation, we need to learn about truth and unlearn a lot about this land now we call Canada, and engage in justice initiatives as a lifelong commitment. And this is where newcomers and indigenous peoples can work together and need to work together. So these are the things I want to really, really highlight. Thank you.
Thank you for these reflections. I'll start with the healthcare point, and it's extremely important. I will say that as a municipality, our current strategy is really focused on programs and services that are within our jurisdiction. I think this came up previously also with the access plan for Two-Spirit trans and non-binary youth, that healthcare services are provincially mandated, and so our scope can be limited in terms of how we move the needle on that. I will say that it does come up frequently in our meetings with community partners that healthcare services are a priority. We do sit on the Uninsured Health Network, and during the pandemic, there had been a program that was put into place by the provincial government to offer healthcare services to people who were uninsured. Unfortunately, that program is no longer active, but the network is currently putting together a report and hoping to do some advocacy work to explore any potential avenues for reinstating that program. And so we are, as members of the network, available and ready to support in terms of any advocacy that we might be able to do, and we have been in conversation with Toronto Public Health as well around that. In terms of the Indigenous knowledge piece, which is also extremely important, we didn't mention, but the Toronto Newcomer Office did develop a guide over the last few years, an Indigenous resource guide specifically for newcomers. And the idea was that we would have a guide that had really kind of entry-level basic information so that people could learn about Indigenous communities and histories. And then also a facilitator's guide, which was made for English language instructors and other folks that work in community organizations who might be teaching newcomers about these subjects so that they could be well equipped to do so. And we've also offered information sessions, and the guide was put together in partnership with an Indigenous-led consultation, like a firm, as well as an advisory committee.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I could add just a couple of points.
Go ahead.
To that. The guide has been amazing. We are delivering thousands of copies each year. It's been really well taken up. I would add that our office also advocates for regularization for everybody. We host an undocumented residence day each year, and we're quite vocal advocates of regularization, which would mean a pathway to citizenship for undocumented people that is low barrier and as inclusive as possible. This is something that the federal government had stated that they would implement, but that is a bit on the back burner right now, unfortunately.
Thank you. Any further questions from anyone? Pink Angel, go ahead, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Newcomer Office presentation and the presenters. You mentioned that you do not provide direct access to services to the newcomer community, but you did mention that there was 150 community organizations that do provide direct services to newcomers. Is there a website or some way that these newcomers could connect with those 150 organizations? In the past, when I worked with newcomers, And as Member Jad said, mentioned that the Muslim community and from the Arab countries were particularly underserviced or not included in services that were provided by many organizations, and also the immediate needs were different. For example, translation services, IRCC guidance, legal representation, housing, employment, education, transit, food, and even accessing emergency shelter, temporary financial assistance. None of these needs were met. I often had to provide many of these personally to these newcomers when they approached me. So is there a website or some method of access to these 150 organizations that you mentioned that provide direct services? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Pink Angel, and thanks for your community work as well. I think that there are a lot of amazing organizations out there, but they're not able to reach everybody, or some people might feel more comfortable speaking with folks in their community. When we spoke about the 150 folks that were at the information fair, that did include city divisions, educational institutions, but many were community organizations. And we generally refer folks to settlement.org, which is a website that you can navigate and you can select what part of the city you're in and what kind of service you're looking for, whether it's housing or employment services. And that's really the best, most up-to-date website. It already exists, so we don't want to duplicate that effort. We often work with many organizations in the city that do work with the Arab community and folks from the Middle East, as for example, the Arab Canadian Community Center and Afghan Women's Organization, so that is closely connected to the work we do as an office, so I appreciate that coming up. You're right that we said we don't do direct service. That one day is, I guess, one of the days that we do a bit more of a direct service. We also have a newcomer kiosk program where you can refer folks to. So embedded within city buildings, such as community centers, civic centers, we have 5 community agencies that we partner with where their staff provide itinerant settlement services at kiosks around the city. And they provide those services regardless of status. So if they are IRCC funded and in their own home organizations, they aren't able to provide services for folks who haven't made a claim yet or who are undocumented when they're on a city property. They do have to work with everybody. So that's a real bonus of that. The newcomer kiosk program is built off of the library settlement network, which is a similar kiosk program within libraries. So those are 2 really good resources for folks in community to reach out to help with service navigation referrals.
Okay, thank you. Nikki, Terrence, 5 minutes, go ahead.
Awesome. Yeah, similarly, do a lot of work with the community out in Rexdale. We have a large newcomer population, and there's definitely an intersectionality. Some of the concerns that come up that may overlap with this is looking at, you had mentioned, again, the partners. And I know that, you don't do frontline work, but you're working with the partners and the committees. Couple questions. So one, can we look, or can you possibly leverage those relationships to create some kind of expectations within those partnerships? I will tell you, and I won't disclose organizations, but at least in the area I work in, there are some organizations that offer settlement services and are not inclusive whatsoever. And this is a constant issue and barrier with the community that I work with. So I think if there's something that we can do to provide supports to those organizations to make sure that they actually are providing culturally relevant services in regards to our community, that would be great. So I don't know if you can or can answer that. Additionally, some thoughts, like I've had a lot of youth come right off the plane, know where to go, don't know where to go, and all that. And that came up, like, is there any partnership, say, with the airports to offer some on-site supports and information, or maybe that's with the partners and the airports. So then when folks come and are seeking to apply for refugee status, or where they can access social supports or even housing, like I literally had a youth who had nowhere to sleep, didn't know where to go, whatever. Like it was interesting. It was upsetting, but I'm curious if there's any partnerships in that regards. And then lastly, looking at educating folks who arrive on different identities and human rights and what those expectations are, not just what their rights are as individuals who access, whether you're from the 2S LGBTQ community or not, but realizing that there are a lot of people who come from different countries and cultures where there's a lot of persecution and judgments to our community, and that gets transferred over, and there's no awareness and education as to how human rights are universal for all and not just segmented populations in our country.
Thank you, Terrence. Those are all very important points. I can start just in terms of the comment around different organizations and this kind of idea of like a standard. I can just say we'll take that back because, of course, not all of those organizations are necessarily funded by the city. Most are funded by Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada. And so, again, we don't necessarily have the jurisdiction to sort of lay out what mandates and eligibility criteria for the services that are being delivered, but I do hear that there is maybe a gap, and that is something that we are aware of, specifically for newcomers that have precarious immigration status, and the city perhaps has a role to play there, so we'll definitely take that back. In terms of access to services for people who arrive at the airport, there's currently the development of a regional reception center in Peel, which you may have heard of. It's led by Peel, but the City of Toronto continues to support this work very closely, and the reception center is, the location that has been identified is close to the airport. I believe there's also a Red Cross program specifically at the airport. There's a kiosk or just outside for newcomers who need support just in terms of being oriented when they arrive. And then your point around training, currently the Toronto Newcomer Office is focused on municipal training, so for our staff specifically, across the corporation. And so these trainings are about trends, specific to immigration newcomer populations that we're seeing here in Toronto, but about our access to city services for undocumented people's policy, to make sure that everybody across the corporation understands that if you're delivering a municipal program or service, it has to be accessible to everybody, and regardless of immigration status, and that we won't ask or report any information around immigration status to CBSA or other levels of government.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Great questions, Terrence. So OCASI, which is the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants, has an IRCC-funded program called the Positive Spaces Initiative, which folks may be aware of, but it aims to support the settlement sector to more effectively serve LGBTQ+ newcomers. So it encourages training, education, leadership, resource sharing to support newcomers, staff, volunteers, and community members. And they do provide trainings throughout the province for free under that funding. So that may be one resource if there is a particular organization. We can't mandate it, but you can always share, hey, there are free trainings available from OCASI's Positive Space Initiative, and that can be a resource for them as well.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other questions, I'll ask maybe one or two myself. How many FTEs do you have in your department? And what's your budget?
We're going to welcome Zenya Wadwani to the table, who is the manager at the Toronto Newcomer Office.
Thanks for the question, Councillor. We currently have, I believe, 6 full-time staff. However, I will say that we are currently down 3 who have recently moved on to other positions, and so we are about half capacity at the moment.
Okay. And how closely do you work with TSSS?
Quite closely.
And I know you don't provide any direct service, but you give direction, I guess, or in regards to some of the issues the city faces around newcomers, refugees. I mean, I'm thinking specifically to last fall when we had all those refugees coming from the continent of Africa, 137 Peter Street, and we had a lot of black church organizations stepping in because the city failed those people. And so there are lessons learned from that, I'm hoping, but what role does your team play to make sure something like this doesn't happen again? I know that this past summer, I worked very closely with 519. They had sessions of hundreds, I think thousands of people coming into the facility supporting refugees because, there's such a great need and there's a gap that no one seems to be able to fill. So again, what role does your department play in all of that?
We have a very close working relationship with our colleagues in TSSS. I think there has been recognition of some of the failures that happened last year, and we have strengthened those relationships to ensure just that we are not missing out on doing things like that again. So we continue to have regular meetings on an ongoing basis. We are often as part of each other's many of the tables that the Toronto Newcomer Office is responsible for coordinating. So there is a lot more information sharing and a lot more connection than has been happening in the past to ensure just that.
One of my concerns, though, is that we have 500 refugees coming into the city of Toronto every month. And we know that a lot of those people are in our shelters, right? Hence the backlogs in encampments. I have daily discussions about this. And I've always said, too, that I think it's inappropriate that the refugees go into a shelter system because the needs of those in the shelters are very different from a newcomer refugee coming to the country. So what mitigations do you have in place to try to alleviate some of those things?
I think that our colleagues in TSSS would likely be better positioned to be able to answer those questions in greater detail, to be honest, Councillor. We do know that the system was not set up initially as a system to serve newcomers and refugees in the way that it is doing so now, and has been adapting and accommodating to be able to do that. So we know that there's recognition that it has lots of areas for improvement on that, but I think our colleagues are better suited to be able to answer what they have currently in place and what is happening in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add, just in terms of your question around our role in specifically the increased arrival of refugee claimants. Our role at the Toronto Newcomer Office is really the leadership and the activation of the Refugee Capacity Plan, which I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So for example, when the Refugee Capacity Plan is activated, we are coordinating a senior executive committee where senior executives from different divisions, including T3S, meet on a daily basis if needed to kind of make sure that everybody is up to date with how we are all responding to the increase in arrivals across different city divisions. And then the City Community Agency table, which we spoke to as well, which is our table where we meet with community partners who are responding. So, for example, the churches, the Black-led churches that responded to the arrivals last summer are part of that space, and T3S, for example, will come, as well as other city divisions, to provide updates to those organizations. So the refugee capacity plan and the coordination of sort of how the city is responding is in our court.
Thanks. Seeing no other further questions, any speakers on the item? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Can I add some, Councillor Moise? I have also, yes.
Go ahead, quickly.
Yeah. So one of the things is that walk-in clinics, a lot of walk-in clinics do not accept newcomers and refugees with the interim federal health coverage, IFH coverage. So therefore, it's very difficult for them, even with the IFH coverage, to access healthcare and find a doctor, family doctor. So is there a way of approaching these walk-in clinics that are operating within the City of Toronto to organize this, to get these services for newcomers? It is to activate the IFH coverage and the system similar to the OHIP coverage, how to get the money back from the government. So that is this is not a complicated system. Once I was told, I can't remember who told me this, but sometimes because there is no legal obligation, they just don't bother to do that. The other one is, I think Terence mentioned that even though there are 150 organizations working with newcomers, it's only a handful of organizations that are working with LGBTQ plus refugees and newcomers. So when you mention 150, it can be misleading. So we need to really carve out this lack of services when it comes to LGBTQ plus newcomers and refugees. The other factor is social isolation is massive for LGBTQ plus refugees and newcomers, myself included. For example, I do not go to my own community because of the fear of homophobia. And for transphobia, homophobia, I cannot go to my own community. By the same token, I cannot go to the mainstream LGBTQ plus communities because quite often I have faced extreme violent forms of racism. And these are not just my story, but I have heard this again and again and again. So social isolation is massive, and this is where we really need to understand the nuanced determinants of health, social determinants of health when it comes to LGBTQ plus newcomers. Thank you.
Do you want to quickly respond?
That was a lot of great commentary. Those are some big questions. I know that IFHS is not the ideal, and it's, you know, like you said, I think that newcomers do face barriers to accessing health services. Within the scope of our work, we do take information like that and bring it into our intergovernmental meetings where we can share with provincial partners to ensure that they are getting that information to their colleagues who can make a change at the provincial level. We wouldn't be the ones going clinic to clinic, but there can be community advocacy as well that takes place around that, and some of that does come through and build up within our city community agency table. So as we spoke about before, the task force, which is an idea that came up from community leaders in that table to really bring together people who are working with 2S LGBTQ newcomers and folks that may not be yet but have an interest in it. Those are the kinds of initiatives that can provide some of the leadership that you're speaking about, and hopefully reducing barriers, but also advocating, I think, for increases in funding. I'm pretty familiar with a lot of the 2S LGBTQ service providers in the city, and I think there are groups here and groups there for specific communities, but they're definitely not enough, and they're definitely not enough across the city in every area. There are a lot of them are downtown-centric. Some of them are specific to youth and missing that adult population that we heard a lot about today. And so finding the right folks to bring together to do the advocacy to increase resources for those kind of programs is the sort of work that we would do.
Thank you.
I could just make one correction. When you asked about staff, we're actually at 8 full-time staff for our unit.
Okay. And you have you're 9, right? And you're down to, sorry.
No, we're at 8 as full-time, but we're down to, we're missing up to 3 people right now, so we're down to 5 of our 8.
Okay.
Sorry.
We have one more item after this one, so let's just put a motion forward to extend to the end and just try to get through this as quickly as possible. I'll have staff put up a motion to extend. You're still working on it? Okay, when you're ready, let me know. Seeing no further speakers on this item, questions on this item, I'm going to move to speakers. Any questions of staff? I know we've been asking questions all along, but any speakers on this item? Seeing none, I do have a motion. I will put it up. Okay. So the motion really is to direct staff to choose the 3 priorities based on the conversation we've been having on this item, Q5.3, and reads that the Two-Spirit LGBTQ Advisory Committee requests the Director, Equity and Human Rights, People and Equity to develop a list of 3 priorities issued based on the committee's discussion and report back to the next committee meeting on January 23rd, 2025. Any questions on this? Speakers, seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We can now move to the last item on the agenda. SQ 5.4, overview of the social procurement program and policy. And we have before us today, purchasing and materials management division. Okay. Genevieve Sharkey, Chief Procurement Officer, and Hilary Kirsted, Director, Program Support, Policy and Strategy, and Diane Levy, Policy Development Officer from Purchasing and Purchasing. But before they start the presentation, let's just put a motion forward to extend. Finish. I'll move that item. No worries. Here we go. So motion to extend. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, you may proceed. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Hilary Kirsted. My pronouns are she and her. I'm the Director of Program Support Policy and Strategy with the Purchasing and Materials Management Division, which I'll be referring to as PMMD. With me today is Diana Levy, Policy Development Officer and Policy Lead on the Social Procurement Program. Diana's pronouns are she and her. And our Chief Procurement Officer, Genevieve Sharkey, is in another committee meeting, but I hope that she will make it before we finish our presentation today. PMMD is the Central Procurement Division of the City of Toronto. We procure on behalf of divisions and provide policies and procedures to guide divisional procurement. Today, we'll be providing an overview of the social procurement policy and program, sharing some results from a review of the program, and discussing recommended next steps. Our first objective is to explain how social procurement works in practice now. We'd like to hear about experiences that committee members and their networks have had with doing business with the city. In particular, we're interested in learning about opportunities to increase spend with businesses owned by people from 2S LGBTQ+ communities, including identifying networks and organizations that we should speak with regarding the social procurement program as we plan community and business engagement in 2025. What is social procurement? Social procurement leverages the city's purchasing power to drive inclusive economic growth through 2 key components: supply chain diversity and workforce development. Supply chain diversity focuses on contracting and subcontracting to Indigenous, Black, and diverse suppliers. Workforce development attempts to increase the number of employment, apprenticeship, and training opportunities, leveraged for people experiencing economic disadvantage, particularly those from Indigenous, Black, and equity-deserving communities. The origin of Toronto's social procurement policy starts in community. As early as 2006, residents began to challenge city staff to use municipal capital spend to create youth employment opportunities. Work then began on connecting youth with jobs on a project-by-project basis until a corporate team was established to scope a social procurement program for the city. This team established a social procurement framework in 2013, which became the current social procurement policy in 2016, in line with direction in the poverty reduction strategy. In 2017, Council adopted the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Action Plan, which included an action to target Black-owned businesses and social enterprises for outreach, training, and vendor networking as part of the social procurement program. In 2019, the social procurement program was recognized as a community benefits initiative under the Corporate Community Benefits Framework. In 2021, Council requested that the Chief Procurement Officer review the policy and incorporate a 10% equity target in construction projects valued over $50 million. And in 2022, the city adopted the Reconciliation Action Plan, which included an action to develop decolonized procurement processes. This work is now proceeding apart from the social procurement program and policy review and is being led by an Indigenous Policy Development Officer dedicated to the Indigenous procurement portfolio and the co-development of an Indigenous procurement policy. As noted, the social procurement program is one of several community benefits initiatives. These initiatives are all administered by different divisions and utilize their own policies, processes, and tools. The Social Development, Finance, and Administration Division oversees the community benefits framework and provides guidance and support on the various approaches. PMMD manages the social procurement program. How does social procurement work in practice? The social procurement policy provides direction to city staff who procure goods and services. There are 3 policy mechanisms that apply to supply chain diversity. First, staff are required to invite at least one Indigenous, Black, or diverse supplier to bid for invitational procurement opportunities valued between $3,000 and $133,800. PMMD maintains a list of certified Indigenous, Black, and diverse suppliers that have expressed an interest in doing business with the city, which divisions use to select suppliers to invite. The city is currently a member of 5 supplier certification organizations, which are nonprofit organizations that certify diverse suppliers in Canada. These are listed in Appendix 1 of the presentation. Certification is essentially a verification of business ownership and identity. The second policy mechanism applies to open competitive procurements valued over $133,800. Points are awarded to suppliers that submit proof of diverse supplier certification with their bids. Additional points are awarded to suppliers with supply chain diversity and employment equity policies and demonstrated results of those policies. The third policy mechanism applies to tied bids. In the instance of tied bids, if one supplier is Indigenous, Black, or diverse and one is not, the award is to the Indigenous, Black, or diverse supplier. In cases where both suppliers are Indigenous, Black, or diverse, the standard method of a coin toss is used to determine award. Workforce development is the second pillar of the social procurement program. As noted earlier, there is council-mandated intake of all construction projects valued over $50 million. Beyond this, all projects valued over $5 million must be reviewed by PMMD to determine if workforce development is applicable to the procurement. Projects are assessed based on their potential to create meaningful employment and skills development opportunities for people from Indigenous, Black, and equity-deserving communities. Projects are reviewed based on 4 principles: suitability, reach, volume, and feasibility. When a project is selected, targets are set based on the solicitation type. For construction projects and for any solicitation where award is to the lowest compliant bid, targets are set up front in 5 activity areas in discussion with the divisional project manager. In evaluated solicitations without a construction agreement, suppliers are asked to include a workforce development plan in their bid that considers the 5 activity areas and which is assessed during the evaluation process. The plan and targets are finalized post-award with the successful supplier. The activity areas are non-construction employment, which involves customized recruitment approaches for professional, administrative, and technical opportunities, opportunities for registered apprentices, training and work-based learning opportunities, subcontracting opportunities for Indigenous, Black, and diverse suppliers, and other employment-related activities such as participation in job fairs. In 2021, City Council directed the Chief Procurement Officer to conduct a 5-year review of the social procurement policy to identify successes and improvements needed in the policy. The review focused on opportunities to maximize impact and consisted of data validation and analysis of program outputs and achievements, a jurisdictional scan of emerging best practice, an online public survey of Indigenous, Black, and diverse suppliers, preliminary community and divisional engagement, discussion with suppliers that have workforce development contract terms, and a feasibility assessment of options to enhance the program's performance. From 2017 to 2023, the city's direct spend with certified Indigenous, Black, and diverse suppliers through the invitational procurement process is over $9.6 million. In 2023, 5.3% of invitational solicitations processed by divisions and 5.9% of invitational solicitations processed by PMMD were awarded to Indigenous, Black, and diverse suppliers. While these statistics are not currently published on the city's website, we do plan to create a public dashboard in 2025. From 2017 to 2023, the city spent around $220,000 with 7 businesses owned by people from 2S LGBTQ+ communities, which is 3% of spend with diverse suppliers. This number represents only spend under the scope of the social procurement policy, so those invitational procurements. We know there's more spend with businesses owned by people from 2S LGBTQ+ communities. For example, outside of the social procurement policy, we've identified over $900,000 in contracts through open competitive procurements. There are challenges with identifying and tracking this spend, which is why it's not included here, and that is something that we'll be working on. From 2017 to 2023, 78 projects have included workforce development requirements, resulting in 100 employment opportunities filled by candidates from Indigenous, Black, and equity-deserving communities, 194 subcontracting opportunities with over $10.4 million in spend with Indigenous, Black, and diverse suppliers, and 188 other employment-related activities such as participation in job fairs. In October 2022, PMMD released a social procurement business survey to understand the barriers Indigenous, Black, and diverse suppliers face when doing business with the city. We had 368 respondents, 92% of the businesses being small businesses. 78% of respondents had never been awarded a city contract. In many ways, the survey validated what we've heard through regular training, outreach, and supplier meetings. The procurement process is complex and difficult to understand. Small businesses in particular face challenges with not only navigating the process, but also with certain solicitation requirements. For example, requirements around number of years of previous experience. In addition, the requirement in the social procurement policy for suppliers to obtain certification excludes some businesses from registering on the social procurement supplier list. Opportunities for the city to better support Indigenous, Black, and diverse suppliers, particularly small business, include more training in different formats. For example, workshops on how to write and submit bids. Better communication was also a key recommendation, including dedicated staff for outreach and system navigation and an easier-to-navigate website. Staff also talked with the Community Benefits Advisory Group, convened by the Social Development, Finance, and Administration Division, with key city divisions, and with suppliers who have workforce development in their contracts. These conversations solidified what we found through the rest of the review process. The social procurement policy and how it fits within the procurement process is not well understood. In particular, questions were raised around how the invitational procurement process works and how hard targets are set for workforce development. In discussions around barriers, both internal and external factors were identified that limit program success. There were concerns around the size and breadth of the social procurement supplier list. In addition, labor shortages in specific job categories were identified as a potential challenge to achieve employment outcomes. Enhanced collaboration is needed relating to both supply chain diversity and workforce development. This includes continuing discussions with Indigenous, Black, and diverse suppliers, job seekers from Indigenous, Black, and equity-deserving communities, community organizations, and labor trade unions. So what's next? Overall, the review demonstrated program achievements that are low in terms of volume and value of contracts awarded to Indigenous, Black, and diverse suppliers and successful employment outcomes. We will be recommending a series of next steps at Executive Committee on December 10th, 2024. The most important recommendation will be more divisional, business, and community engagement through 2025. The engagement is intended to inform a second phase of recommendations and a report to Council in 2026. Implementation of second phase program enhancements will proceed in 2027, following which we'll move to a regular 5-year evaluation cycle. This roadmap slide is focused on reporting to City Council, administrative and procedural improvements with which the Chief Procurement Officer has the authority to make will proceed throughout. Our first priority is continuing engagement. To do this, an advisory committee with representation from community and business will be formed in 2025. Community engagement sessions will also be planned in discussion with that advisory committee. In advance of engagement in 2025, we know that there are program enhancements that can be made under the Chief Procurement Officer's authority. In particular, to address challenges with workforce development in the short term, we are proceeding with updating solicitation templates to clarify requirements, particularly around target setting. I'll speak to the proposed policy enhancements on the following 2 slides. The most consistent feedback we heard from the business survey was that the city's reliance on certification is creating barriers for many suppliers. Cost is a significant barrier, but not the only one. We recommend expanding beyond the current certification process to include organizations, associations, and chambers of commerce that represent Indigenous, Black, and diverse suppliers. Community-based organizations have a relationship with the communities they represent and know their members best. This will allow the city to meet suppliers within their current networks rather than asking them to incur a cost to become part of a new organization. The city will still recognize the current certification organizations and the Indigenous, Black, and diverse suppliers currently registered with the city. Making this change is critical for staff to fulfill the 2021 Council Directive to achieve an annual 10% increase in the number of suppliers on the city's social procurement supplier list. The advisory committee will consider additional questions around business ownership definitions and alternative approaches for the city to expand the list of Black and diverse suppliers. As they relate to Indigenous businesses, these questions will be discussed at a separate advisory circle for the co-development of an Indigenous procurement policy. Finally, the current definition of social enterprise in the social procurement policy is based on the social enterprise landscape in Toronto in 2016 and is similar to what is now considered an employment social enterprise. Staff conducted a jurisdictional and literature review to explore the various business models aimed at creating social impact, including social enterprises. Based on this research and discussions with community organizations, we recommend adopting the definition of social enterprise used by Bisexual Canada and recognizing Bisexual Canada certified social enterprises. This definition encompasses employment social enterprises, but is broader and includes businesses that embed a social, cultural, or environmental purpose into the business and reinvest 51% or more of profits into a social, cultural, or environmental mission. As with the previous recommendation, we would want to keep this process open to other organizations and associations representing social enterprises. In addition, as part of engagement in 2025 and ongoing review, staff will consider other social business models such as employee-owned or worker collective models. Thank you for your attention. We would be happy to answer any questions and would appreciate hearing your feedback.
Thank you. Any questions for our presenters? Pink Angel, go ahead, 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you to the presenters for social procurement within the City of Toronto. Now, with regards to the invitational bids to represent Indigenous, Black, and diverse vendors, there is obviously barriers regarding cost and many other barriers, particularly for small vendors. But and the big ones, my concern is with whether these large vendors to the City of Toronto, construction companies and so on, what measures are in place with social procurement to ensure that these smaller and larger vendors to the City of Toronto, what measures are in place to make sure that these vendors are actually Indigenous, Black, or diverse, and the system is not being abused in the way of, let's say, merely on paper they are diverse, and there may be some names attached to those vendors. Is there any measures in place through by social procurement to vet these vendors so that no abuse is actually taking place within these vendors? We have heard, on other levels of government in procurement services that these large vendors have mere figureheads and just names to their companies, and yet they bid under those three categories, Indigenous, Black, and diverse, particularly Indigenous, that they abuse the system through merely having, by some quasi-association with these different...
5 organizations have rigorous verification processes, and so we are confident that the suppliers on the city's current social procurement supplier list are owned by the people who they have put themselves forward to be. What we're proposing with this presentation is to recognize other organizations, associations, and chambers of commerce that know their members. And this is a measure to support with offsetting some of the cost burden without the risk that you mentioned, Pink Angel, of potential fraud in who is on the city social procurement supplier list and the contracts that they could obtain through that list. And we know that conversation around identity is going to have to happen. That's one of the conversations that will happen at the advisory committee next year, and I think on an ongoing basis, because it is a complex and challenging conversation.
Okay. Any further questions from anybody else? I have a question. What was the total value of the social procurement in 2023 for the City of Toronto?
In 2023, approximately $1.4 million under the social procurement policy. So that's specifically in invitational procurements.
$1.4 million?
Approximately, yes.
Is that the average year after year?
It has increased year over year, but we had a bit of a drop in the last 2 years. That we're recovering from just due to some staff gapping and vacancies.
And why, knowing where the gaps are, looking at the chart, why do we need another advisory committee when we know what the issues are? Like, why can't we just have a strategy to meet the goals that we've set out?
It's an excellent question. The social procurement supplier list right now is dependent on those 5 certification organizations. And there are limits to how much more we can expand the list without looking at new approaches. But to do that, we need to talk about the definition of what an Indigenous, Black, or diverse supplier is. And I don't believe that is a conversation that the city has had with community yet.
So we have a Confronting the Black Racism Advisory Committee. We have an Indigenous Advisory Committee. We have this committee. Why can't we use those leverage is rather than forming a new committee?
That is an excellent question. We do want to ensure that there's representation from business, so we could look at leveraging this committee and then potentially, if there are any gaps, supplementing with additional consultation. We also want to ensure that we speak with the labor trade unions and the larger businesses that the city contracts with, which would not be represented here. So that was the thinking with the advisory, that it would be a mix of large business, small and diverse business, labor trade unions, community organizations. But we could take that feedback back and think through it again and come back to you.
And again, we have BIAs across the city that also help with that as well. So
certainly,
I just don't want this to be busy work, right? There's enough work to do in this place already. Anyways, I digress. Any other comments from anybody else? Seeing none, thank you so much for your presentation today. Yes, a motion to receive this item. I'm gonna ask Pink Angel to move it. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. And thank you to all the committee members who came in today and stuck it out. I appreciate it. And to those in the room and to our staff, thank you for all that you do each and every day. Have a wonderful work week. Thank you.